Hello, folks. How are we doing tonight? Welcome, welcome. Glad y'all are here. Good to have you. I'm pulling up my stories now so that I can get to reading them. I'm very excited tonight. Tonight is going to be a good night. I can feel it. All right, well, I should go ahead and say I'm pretty worn out from work today. Very tired. It was a very rough, very long day. So tonight I just want to chill out. I want to talk with you guys. I want to do some reading. We're going to have a good night. We're going to just have some fun tonight. Now, obviously, I know you guys want me to continue with New Epoch, and we certainly will. We certainly will. But before we do, I want to read a different story to you guys, a short story first, so that way we can start off with something a little different. I'm trying to find the right thing to read. Let me see. Now, I've read that one on the channel before. Trying to find a really good one. I have so many. Some of these are really old, actually. Yeah, some of these are very... Wow, I'm looking at some of my older stories, and some of these are kind of shocking me. Anyway, Raven, what will I read? I'm still working that out. I'm looking at some of my stories, trying to figure out what would be a good story to start with before I go into New Epoch. Because I want to read something different tonight. Like, I want to try to mix some things up, you know? I love reading New Epoch, but I kind of want to involve other stories as well. I wonder... Here's one. I'll read Working a Beat. This is a pretty good one. Okay, so, Working a Beat. I wrote this on May 3rd, 2023, so it was last year. This is another one of the Edenite Chronicles. And if you guys don't remember, the Edenite Chronicles was a story concept that I created, which is basically an anthology series. It's a series of different short stories compiled in the same world, where you have the human world, and you also have a monster world. And there is a portal in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle, which has been hidden from humanity for thousands of years, which now we've discovered, and now the monster world, which is devoid of humans, is now interacting with the human world, and they are going back and forth between the two. And this is one of the Edenite Chronicles. So the story is called Working a Beat. Like I said, published May 30th, 2023. So we'll start with this one. I think you will like it. I very much like this one. So let's do Monster Club. I do want to read Monster Club to you guys. And tell you what, if things go well tonight, I may at least read the first chapter to you. If things go well tonight. So let's get started. Working a Beat, an Edenite story. There are three kinds of people who become cops. There are those who want to help their community and make it a better place. There are those who do it to follow in the footsteps of friends or family. And then there are those who get a high out of the power it offers. In a just world, the first type would make up the majority of the police force. But sadly, the third type keeps popping up all too often. The line between good cop and bad cop is clear as day, so why the hell does no one know how to spot it? Jason's best guess? Necessity. Not a lot of people want to be cops these days. Either they think that either they think the job is too dangerous, given the political and social climate of the world, or they hate cops in general and don't want anything to do with them in the first place. There are too few cops to deal with all the crime out there, and the ones who want to just do their jobs often find their hands tied behind red tape. You have to wrestle a man to the ground who's resisting arrest? Well, better hope you don't accidentally give him a busted lip, or your name could be in the paper, and if he's a minority, you'll be on the evening news. Of course, Jason was never too worried about that. After all, Jason was African American himself. Born and raised in the Bronx, Jason Walker wanted to be a cop for as long as he could remember. His mom was appalled by the idea and had tried all his young life to talk him out of it, but Jason never listened. Being a cop was all he wanted to do. He knew why, too, and he tried to explain it to his mom, but she never listened. Most of his friends didn't listen either. Some even thought he was joking, until he graduated the police academy. Now, Jason Walker was a sergeant. He had a command position. He had responsibilities and people who depended on him. It was something to be proud of. He often enjoyed finding rookies fresh out of the academy to ride with. He'd show them the ropes and help them get more used to the job, but he was also very scrutinizing, watching them. He had to understand what kind of cop they may turn out to be. Would they disgrace the uniform or bring honor to it? He found a bunch of kinds. He'd seen plenty of both kinds, plenty who loved the uniform and the duty, and plenty who weren't cut out for the job, because Jason Walker is an excellent judge of character. But for the first time in his career, when looking over a rookie, Jason found himself stumped. "Morning, Sarge!" Jason blinked and turned at the sound of the trotting behind him. She stood a full head taller with him, with her long blonde hair tied back in a bun and an officer's cap on her head. She had on a scarf to keep back the cold from her neck, and she was wearing her winter blue uniform, long-sleeved and gloves on her hands. She saluted cheerfully, and her blue eyes shone with excitement. Her shield on her chest was polished, and her service pistol was strapped to her holster professionally. In every respect, Alicia Hassan looked like a model police officer, until you looked below the waist and you realized she was quite different from most cops. From her waist down was a large horse body with 4 hooves and a swishing tail, the same color as her hair. She had on a warm cushion covering over her horse half to defend it from the cold, and it was a nice NYPD blue color, no less. Alicia Hassan was a centaur, one of the Edenites. When the dimensional rift in the Bermuda Triangle had been discovered 4 years ago, everyone assumed that war was the only inevitable outcome, a war between humanity and the non-human races of the world known as Eden. These Edenites, as they were collectively called, were more primitive in nature than humanity, but they made up for it in their diversity, skills, and adaptability. When war was avoided, many Edenites began moving to the human world to learn, explore, and work. Inevitably, some wanted to join the police force. Since last year, the NYPD had been inducting Edenite officers into the department, but this was Jason's first time with one, and he was going to be her ride-along. You don't need to salute me right now," Jason advised. Quickly, Allison dropped her salute and blushed. "Sorry, sir, just really excited. First day and all." "Yeah, I know," Jason agreed. He then glanced at the patrol cards and smirked to himself as he tried to imagine Alicia just attempting to squeeze herself into one of those. He'd been smart to just give her a walking beat today. Probably wouldn't be the only kind of beat she could do. But how were they even going to do it? "So, where first?" "We have a specific beat we're going to walk, but it's a good distance away, and getting you in a car just ain't going to work," Jason explained. Alicia smiled and lowered herself. "Well, you can ride on my back if you like," she offered. Jason blinked and stepped back a pace in surprise, but she hadn't lost her smile. "It's really fine. I don't mind." "Really?" he asked. "I figured you might take offense." Some might, but I really don't, Alicia shrugged. We do what we have to so we can get the job done. Jason stared at her for a long moment. This behavior was a bit unprofessional, but he also couldn't help but concede the point. Without taking her offer, they'd never get to their destination. All right, if you're sure. Jason was relieved to be finally on his own 2 feet after riding all the way to Central Park. It wasn't that Alicia was difficult to ride, not at all. In fact, she was very careful and steady in her pace. It was the looks she got and the uncomfortable sensation that Jason had riding her. He felt it was inappropriate mounting her like this. She clearly didn't mind and even seemed excited to start work. When people saw her, some waved, and there were occasional Edenites who walked by who waved to her. One even seemed to know her, and she would wave back to him. But now that he was on his own 2 feet, he adjusted his hat and looked at the very eager-looking centaur. All right, so when walking these, there are lots of things you want to keep in mind, Jason explained, going through his normal explanation. What kind of things? It's never a good idea for police to just hide in their cars. Pedestrians like to feel like they're safe, so if we're walking around in plain view, it often helps to sell that. Sometimes they'll even come to you and ask for help or to inform you of some crime they saw. You listen to them, you take statements, and help where you can, in those cases only. Right, Alicia beamed. Jason smirked. What, you think it's easy? No, sir, she quickly corrected. Don't lie, kid, he answered. One thing you need to remember on this job is you need to be sure of yourself. If you make a choice, then commit to it. What if it's the wrong choice, sir? Alicia asked. Well, that don't matter. If you show uncertainty to civilians, then they'll take it as a weakness. They'll see what else they can make you cave on. You trust your instincts and follow your training. If you ever don't know the right thing to do, ask your partner or radio superior. But when you act on something, you stick to it. Got it, Sarge. Alicia smiled as they walked along. As they walked, a few folks looked, pointed, and stared. Jason didn't like it. They were making her out to be some kind of freak show or attraction, not a police officer. It was disgraceful. But Alicia didn't seem to mind. You know, I got a question for you, rookie, he asked. Sir? Why did you move from Eden to be a cop? He asked. Alicia blinked a moment and slowed her pace, adjusting her gloves. Why'd I do it? It seems an odd choice. Leave home, be a police officer in a city that still sees you as a monster? Jason explained. Alicia thought about it for a moment, crossing her arms over her breasts as she walked. Jason had to take long strides to keep up with her. Well, honestly, it's a complicated answer, she replied. Well, we got time, Jason shrugged. Alicia smiled and brushed a strand out of her hair behind her ear. She snorted pleasantly. Well, I'm from the province of Ellendale, in the kingdom of Rohalem, she explained. She noticed Jason's bewildered expression and giggled. I am sorry, Rohalem is one of the 7 kingdoms of Eden. Well, don't know all that much about Eden, Jason explained. Rohalem is a diverse kingdom with many races that call it home, but the kingdom is predominantly dominated by beastmen, more animal-like races. You mean like centaurs? Jason asked. Alicia nodded. Yes, and my clan lived in the province of Ellendale, which is controlled by Rohalem, she added. All right, sounds nice. Jason tried to be polite, without conceding just how lost he was. How did any of this answer his question? Well, see, one of the big problems we have in Ellendale is how far away we are from the capital of Rohalem. We sometimes get attacked or raided by bandit groups or elements of neighboring lands, she explained. The Rohalem soldiers can't always come to help, so we took up arms and formed the Ellendale militia, citizens who were training to fight back if bandits showed up. Jason listened and tried to mentally picture that. So were you a member? I started training under my dad, she explained, but Dad never really wanted me to join the militia, said it was too dangerous. He wanted me to find a future away from Ellendale and somewhere safer. And so he recommended the human world, Jason asked. Actually, no. He's furious that I came here, she giggled. Absolutely livid. I can't even talk to him, Jason snorted, trying to hold back laughter. You're not making any sense, he chortled. Alicia giggled. Okay, well, see, it's like this. I don't want... Police! Jason and Alicia were pulled away from the conversation by a woman running towards them, eyes wild and her hair messed up. She was wearing sweatpants and a jogging shirt with a fanny pack around her waist that bobbed lightly as she ran. Police! Police, help! Jason broke into a run towards her with Alicia behind him. What is it? What's wrong? He demanded. She pointed away from her down the path she'd been running. She was out of breath, barely able to form words. My purse! My purse was taken! She cried. He ran that way! She kept pointing in the direction of the pathway. Jason looked up the path and nodded. We'll get him, Alicia said firmly. Come on, Sarge! Rookie, Jason snarled at her dangerously. Alicia looked surprised. Sarge, we got this, she urged. He ignored her and turned to the woman. What's he look like? It happened so fast, she whimpered. He had on a red shirt, blue jeans, a jacket on. White man, black man, Hispanic, Jason urged. The woman thought for a moment and nodded. He looked black, and he was a bit taller than you. Facial hair? Jason pushed. Sarge, he is going to get away, Alicia pushed. Shut it, rookie, Jason snapped back. I'm sorry, I don't remember anything else. Please, I can't remember. The woman was in hysterics, clutching her chest as Jason helped her to a bench, and then he grabbed his radio. This is Sergeant Willens. We have a purse snatching reported in the area. Suspect is tall, African-American male wearing red shirt and blue jeans. Suspect was last seen running southbound. We're pursuing on foot. Any units in the area, please acknowledge. Copy that, Sarge. Got a car heading that way. We'll box him in. Acknowledged, he replied. Finally, he turned to the woman again and smiled reassuringly. It's going to be all right, man. Rookie, with me. He turned and started running down the path with Alicia right next to him, running fast. She looked peeved, but he didn't speak until they were out of the woman's line of sight. Don't you ever do that again, rookie. Do what? Make promises like that, he growled back. One of the first rules dealing with citizens and victims, don't you ever make them promises. Why not? She was scared. She needed hope. And what will you tell her when you can't get what she asks? Jason snarled. What happens when you can't keep that promise? Alicia didn't answer, staring ahead, unable to look him in the eyes. You are too damn green for this, Alicia. I don't much care what your dad taught you about being in the militia, but police ain't militia, and if you thought this was some kind of combat zone, we'd be fighting the good fight and waging war against the criminal scum of the world, then you better head on back to Eden. In this city, nothing is that poetic or that simple. You do not make promises to people that you can't keep. Jason slowed his run, and Alicia pulled ahead before realizing he'd slowed down. Why are you stopping? Because we're going the wrong way, Jason explained. The wrong way? The victim pointed this way, Alicia said, confused. Jason shook his head. First rule of walking a beat, kid, never trust everything you hear. Trust your instincts. Sarge, I don't understand. Did you notice how that woman was dressed? He asked. Sweatpants, sweatshirt, running shoes. Maybe she was going for a run? Do you normally go running with a purse? He asked. Alicia frowned a moment and then her eyes widened. She had a fanny pack. So she wouldn't have had a purse in the first place if she was going for a run, Alicia cried. That's right. Jason turned back the way they came and smiled. Now, ask yourself, rookie, why would a woman lie about a purse being stolen? Alicia thought hard and tried to get the pieces together. I'm guessing because she wanted to trick us? Right. She wanted the cops to look the other way. Now, why would she want that? Why would you want the police to look the other way for any reason? Jason asked. So she could commit a crime and not get caught, Alicia cried. Jason nodded. That's right. Then why are we just standing here? We gotta stop her. Why do you even let us run this way in the first place? Alicia cried. You kept making promises and talking all heroic. It'd look real bad to everyone else if I started countermandering you playing hero, he replied. Alicia blushed and shook her head. But she'll get away, Alicia cried. Will she? And here I thought centaurs were supposed to be fast. The woman's name was Belinda Hardy, and she was now jogging her way to the exit of the park, feeling pretty pleased with herself. It was always the same. Bleeding heart coppers are easy to fool if you shed some crocodile tears and point them away from you. Then by the time they get back to you with the bad news, you're already jogging away with the goods in your pack. It'd been a little different this time, what with that horsewoman there, but it was fine now. She was home free. The sound of galloping hooves pounding behind her, and Belinda turned to see the centaur girl suddenly bounding towards her. Belinda had only a moment to look terrified before she began sprinting away. She jumped a fence and tore across the green lawn to escape. The centaur was right behind her, her legs bounding to get away, but it was no use, as the police horsewoman was now on top of her with an abnormally long pole in her hands, which she swiftly used to strike out and knock out Belinda's feet. She screamed and rolled to the ground as the policewoman trotted past her and turned to gallop back, holding the pole over her as if it were a spear to ground her. Don't move, the centaur shouted. Why are you chasing me? She cried. What the hell did I do? Well, a new voice panted, finally catching up. I think you can help us explain that. Jason had caught up, his uniform dirty and his hat off as he panted heavily, trying to catch his breath. I wish you'd have waited for me to get on your back before taking off, officer. Sorry, Sarge, she answered, not moving her pole. I just got excited. What the hell is wrong with you two? I'll have you sue for harassment. Well, see, we started to look for your purse snatcher, but I forgot we had to take your name so we would know who to call if we didn't find it. The problem is, you were already gone. Makes me wonder how attached you were to that purse if you're already leaving. He then knelt down and pointed to her fanny pack. Besides, why would you have a purse? Wouldn't your stuff be in there? Leave that alone, she cried. Sorry, but we have to rule out a few things, Jason explained. See, purses, they carry all kinds of items, and we just need to see what you're already carrying so we know we won't find in your purse. He then unzipped the pack and smirked as he saw bags of white powder hidden within. I guess we can rule out makeup. Jason sat on a bench at the park as two officers walked Belinda Hardy to their car for processing. He had a bottle of water in his hands that he was sucking from, thirst gripping him fiercely. Alicia stood beside him, looking both pleased but a little embarrassed. "That was a good takedown," Jason told her. Sorry, Adam Man. "That was a good takedown," Jason told her. "I'm sorry about how I acted earlier." "You're still inexperienced, rookie," he said. "But don't feel too bad. She's probably done this before, misleading cops so they won't notice her running out with drugs in her pocket. I'm betting she's a veteran at that game." "So why even risk it? If she just jogged by us, we wouldn't have even noticed," Alicia sighed. "Well, sometimes to overcompensate, criminals overplay their hand. They're so convinced that they're acting suspicious that they try to compensate and convince you to look the other way. And some cops are the same. They're so desperate to play hero that they make promises they have no way of keeping. Does that sound familiar?" Jason asked. "I really am sorry, sir," Alicia frowned. "So why did your dad not want you to come here?" Jason asked. I want to hear the rest of that story." Alicia shrugged and rubbed her shoulders. "Dad told me the human world is dangerous, filled with dishonorable and wicked people who would gladly stab me in the back for being different. But the truth is, I want to help people. That's all I ever wanted to do. And if I can't do it in Eden because Dad won't let me join the militia, I want..." She paused, looking downtrodden. Jason stared at her a moment and sighed, rubbing his hands together as he set down his half-empty water bottle. "You know, you're lucky. I never knew my dad," Jason explained. "He was a police officer too, you know." "He was?" Alicia asked. "Won an award for selflessness and valor in the line of duty. Saved a whole school bus of kids one time too. That's what it said in the newspaper article anyway. He was a hero." "Sounds like you did know him," Alicia giggled. "My mom told me a lot about him, but he died when I was 2, Jason explained. "Shot in the back by a perp who he didn't see coming." Alicia's smile faded fast. "Oh, Sarge, I'm so sorry." "Mom didn't want me following in his footsteps," Jason explained. "But it's all I ever wanted." The two sat quietly, not speaking for a moment as the sounds of the city and the park drifted around them softly. "There are 3 kinds of people who become cops, Alicia," he explained. "The kind who genuinely want to help people and do the right thing. The kind who do it because their friends and family do it. And the kind who just want the high of power and authority. I knew I was never the latter, but sometimes I was afraid that I wasn't the first one either. I kept asking myself if I became a cop because I wanted to do the right thing or because I wanted to make life better for others, or was I just living in my dad's shadow? And that's what Mom thought. She thought I was only doing it for my dad, not for me. But my mama, she don't get it." He glanced up at Alicia for a moment. "There are lots of people in this city who think my skin color means I'm a victim. And there's some who think it means I'm entitled. Being a cop to some of them is a complete paradox. Why would any young black boy from a low-income single-parent household want to become a cop if it wasn't for his dead hero dad? Well, I don't care about that stuff. Never did, and I never will. What I do care about is who I want to be for the rest of my life. I want to be a cop. Not just for my daddy, but for me. And you did the same thing when you came here and signed on to be a cop. I can tell you're the kind of cop who wants to make the world a better place. Idealistic and headstrong. You should be wearing a suit of armor instead of a shield." Alicia blushed and giggled at that. "You think so?" "You have a strong heart, rookie. But if you really want to make the city safe, you have a lot to learn." He pointed that out. Then let's keep going," Alicia smiled. "We still have more time in our tour today." "Hey, not so fast, kid," Jason winked. "You just call it a drug runner. You got to do the paperwork," he snickered. "Let's head back to the precinct and get all that out of the way. Then we can see about turning you into a superhero." And that is Walking a Beat. Needed a drink. Sorry about that. A bit of a different story. So one of the things that I really wanted to do with that story was I had a friend who was he was a black friend, and he told me how he wanted to become a police officer. And I thought it was cool. I was like, hey, man, that's awesome. But he said that his parents didn't really want him to do it. They thought that it was a crazy idea. Not because he was black. That was what I assumed. I thought is because you come from a black family and there's kind of a tension between the police and black people at the time. And he said, no, it's because they think I'll get killed. He said, it's because they think that I'm going to die. They think that I'm going to get killed in some drug bust or in some bank robbery or something like that. And he said, I know. And he said, and I'm scared of that too, but I want to do it. And so I thought, well, I kind of want to see that written out here. So I kind of modeled my friend off of my friend into Jason here. So that is Walking a Beat. Does she appear in any more stories? Actually, believe it or not, I did write another Centaur Cop story before this one, but I don't know if I still... Do I still have it? Hold on, let me see. Do I still have that? It isn't the same girl. It's a different girl. I think I might... I don't know if I still have it. I have one more Edenite story. I do have one more Edenite story, but I don't know if I have that. I'll need to look for it later. Okay. So y'all want to go ahead to New Epoch, or do you want to hear another short story? I don't mind either way. I mean, since I mentioned it, would you like to hear the other Edenite story? Jedi Knight involved a satyr. Yeah, yes, it did, Jedi. You remember that one. Do you always write Centaur characters as women? Not always. I did write one who was a guy, but I've only written 3 stories with Centaurs in it, so, yeah. Like David from Monster Club is a guy. David from Monster Club is a guy, and he's a Centaur. So, they're not always women, but in those 2 stories, they were women. All right, so let's do the last Edenite story. We'll do one more Edenite story. This one is called A Classroom of Monsters. Now, I wrote this one... When did I write this one? This was May 9th, 2023. This is another Edenite story, and this one I wrote because I was still a teacher at the time. I was still teaching, and I kind of got inspired by that. So, Mal's already like, New Epoch. Well, let's read this, and then we'll go to New Epoch, Mal, okay? All right, here we go. What is a satyr? It is a human with the lower legs of a goat. Like, their legs are goat legs, and they have goat horns. Mr. Tumnus from Narnia is a good example, although he calls himself a fawn. Philatides, remember Hercules? Phil, the little fat guy voiced by Danny DeVito who trains Hercules? That's a satyr. Okay, anyway, back to it. Here we go. This is A Classroom of Monsters requested story. One word of advice. No matter what your degree or how many years you take in college, you will never be ready for the students you're going to teach. The truth is that no amount of training, educational theory, or class time will be enough to prep you for the unique classroom that you'll be given. You will be put into a classroom full of students, most of whom do not care about you or what you have to say, and only a handful will actually try. You'll try to be friends with the kids. You'll try to be their pal. You'll give a little slack and encouragement. In exchange, the students will start to walk all over you, ignoring your instructions and requests and direction. So you have to harden up and start enforcing discipline. Now they think you're a tyrant and being unfair. Now you're the mean teacher. You're the unfair teacher. You begin to care less and less about the students as time goes on. And you start to care less about the class or your own subject. You begin to beg for the last day of school so you can slam the door and hope it hits a few of those brats on the way out. No, I'm not bitter. Why do you ask? Joking aside, what I just described to you was the first 2 years of teaching English in high school. By my 3rd year, I'd gotten more or less used to the way things were meant to roll, and I developed my system. I will say that teaching starts to get more natural as time goes on. You figure out what works and what doesn't. And while I'm not necessarily the super fun buddy teacher that I hoped I would be, I wasn't a tyrant either. I'd found a comfortable middle ground from trial and error. I felt more confident as a teacher. Until I moved. I'd been in need of a move for a while. I ended up moving from Tennessee to Georgia. A new high school, a new set of students, but also a new world. See, the school I was going to was Montresor High School. MHS was unique as it had been chosen as a school for integrating Edenite families, earning MHS a new title, from Montresor High School to Monster High School. When explorers discovered a new dimension hidden in the fogs of the Bermuda Triangle, humanity discovered Eden, a world of non-humans like elves, dwarves, centaurs, mermaids, and harpies. War was expected as our cultures clashed, but after some tension and uncertainty, peace was arranged, and soon intercultural exchange began to occur. Edenites, the non-human people of Eden, were now seeking to explore our world and technology, while humanity was excited to explore Eden. That, of course, meant some Edenites would go to human schools. Not all schools were open to it, but MHS certainly was. I was informed that the sophomore class I'd been teaching would be about a third Edenite. I hadn't been sure how to feel about that, and to say I was nervous was something of an understatement. But, as I said, you're never truly prepared, no matter how much prep work you do, so I accepted the inevitable and prepared for the next day. My first block was actually all human, a bunch of sophomores who felt kind of full of themselves and satisfied to be able to tease freshmen now. They didn't keep that up long in my class. I laid down my rules, I got the class started as simply and natural as I could, and things seemed to go over well. But second block, I got my first Edenite students. A merman in a wheelchair named Eric, a blonde-headed harpy girl named Haley, and a dwarf who already had a full beard named Troy. I admit, I was taken aback by them, and I wasn't the only ones. Many of the human students in class couldn't stop staring at them, and I found it hard to blame them. Troy never made eye contact with anyone as his feet dangled from his desk chair. Haley seemed a bit oblivious to it, just all smiles and answering any questions she was asked. She struck me as something of a bimbo or an airhead, but to my surprise, she wasn't nearly as dumb as her personality indicated. She could even name 2 plays by Shakespeare besides Romeo and Juliet, which even some of my human students couldn't do. As for Eric, he was very quiet. I got the sense he wished that he was invisible. He kept brushing his brown locks behind his ears that looked away from everyone. Troy didn't meet anyone's gaze, partly because he was just uninterested in conversation, but Eric, I could tell, was scared of something. I wanted to find out what, but that could wait. I had planning for third block, and then fourth block, the last block of the day, I had probably the most interesting student. This time I had 5 Edenite students. 2 of them were elves, both boys, David and Alistair. Both had very long golden hair and pointed ears that stuck out from it. They even wore similar clothing, and for a moment I thought they might have been brothers, but it turns out no, they were cousins. The third was a tall, mature-looking girl with gray hair and blue eyes. She had a dog tail and ears that matched. I would later learn she was some kind of Ainu. I was told, but I didn't know for sure. All I know is she's some kind of dog creature, and she went by Andrea. The fourth was an actual minotaur. He had a bull's head and everything, though his horns weren't fully in. His name was Freddy, and to my surprise, he was actually a very shy boy, mostly keeping to himself and not speaking much. The last one was probably the most frightening. Walking in on 8 long, spiny legs, but with a long scorpion tail, she wore a black shirt that matched her carapace lower body. It was like someone had cut a high school girl's legs off and glued the torso to the head of a scorpion the size of a small car. Her name was Rebecca, and if Freddie and Eric were nervous and shy, she was mortified. I actually heard her coming before she showed up, as I could hear gasps and small screams when she entered the room. Her black hair masked part of her face, and her eyes shimmered with tears behind her glasses. I admit, I felt a mix of revulsion, but I also felt a mix of pity. She later told me that she was what's called a Gerta-Blilu. I was swiftly beginning to realize I was very much out of my element, even though I did what I could to make the class run smoothly. The days turned into weeks, but by the end of week 2, I realized there was something wrong. First block was doing fine, or as fine as I expected them to, but second and fourth block were apparently having trouble. Grades were dropping for the Edenite children, especially, and there were more and more reports of verbal harassment and bullying. There's always a little teasing among kids, you get used to it, but this felt unusually harsh. Apparently one student had stolen Troy's backpack and played a few rounds of keep away. Tony had picked him up and a fight broke out. In the aftermath of the fight, Eric, who had been a bystander, was knocked from his wheelchair and nearly trampled. It took the SRO and 2 teachers to stop the fight. Several Edenite parents were worried about the state of things at the school, and I didn't blame them. They wanted another Edenite educating their children, but we only had one Edenite educator, and I hadn't met her yet, so that was out of the question. Something had to be done, though, and done soon. 2 days after the fight, I was packing my stuff to head home when I heard a noise. Someone was crying. I wandered towards the sound and made my way to the other side of the hallway to the guidance counselor's office. I knocked politely and opened up to see what was going on. There I saw perhaps the most bizarre sight yet. There was Rebecca, the Gerta-Blilu, curled up in the corner and sobbing into her hands, her long legs tucked up under her. In a wheelchair next to her was Eric, and on the other side was Andrea, both of whom were gazing at her with expressions of both concern and despair. "Excuse me?" I spun at the sound. "Excuse me?" I spun at the sound of the voice and saw a woman standing by the door. She had on a professional attire suit, heels, and her arms were crossed as she glared at me. From behind sunglasses that looked out of place indoors, until I saw that instead of hair, she had writhing, wriggling snakes all over her head and shoulders, making it seem as if her hair was actually alive. I stifled a shout, though my widening eyes were quite apparent. Are you one of their teachers? He's Mr. Grissetti, Eric spoke up, noticing me. He's our English teacher. Hearing that seemed to calm the Gorgon later. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Smith. I'm the new school counselor. Oh, right. We haven't met, I admitted stupidly, shaking her hand. She gave an apologetic smile. That's largely my fault. I only just started 2 days ago. I'm a little late, I know, but moving was a bit tricky for me, she admitted. So you're needing night too? I realized just how stupid I sounded asking the question. No, I just think snakes on my scalp is the latest fashion trend, she smirked, giving me a look that made me groan. I walked into that jab. I'm sorry, but what's going on? The teasing expression left her when she turned back to the children. It seems Rebecca's being bullied a lot. It's the same guys, Andrea snarled, sounding like the dog she resembled. It's Philip, Nishan, and Isaiah. I thought on the two names. I didn't know Philip or Nishan, but I knew Isaiah. He was in my first block class. His grades were below average, and he usually did nothing but sit around and do nothing, looking for an excuse to cut class. He did strike me as the type to bully if he could. What did he do? I asked. Rebecca shook her head without answering. You don't have to tell me. I just want to understand the situation. It happened in the bus loop, Eric explained. Andrea nodded and pulled out a torn-up pile of yellow tape. I took it and unraveled it to see it said, "Toxic, do not cross." They threw this all over her, shouting and laughing about her being a poisonous bug, Andrea hissed angrily. I frowned and threw the tape aside and knelt down in front of Rebecca, who was still sobbing. Rebecca, how are you getting home? The bus has left. I called her mother, Elizabeth answered. Until then, she's waiting here. What about you two? I looked at Andrea and Eric. I have volleyball practice, Andrea said. Well, I did, but I don't want to leave Rebecca like this. And I'm waiting on my dad to come get me, Eric answered. I nodded and looked at Rebecca firmly. After a few moments, she looked at me. Her glasses were off, and I could tell she was still on the verge of a crying fit. Rebecca, I want to talk to your mom about your grades in class. The whole room stared at us a moment. Even Rebecca looked confused. What? She hiccuped. You didn't do great on your last quiz. We need to talk about extra credit work, I whispered. A thought was starting to grow in my mind. So when your mom gets here, don't leave. Go to my classroom and wait for me with her, okay? Mr. Grissetti? Elizabeth asked, looking at me in surprise. The three of you need to get going. Andrea, don't miss volleyball. You need to get going. Eric, make sure Rebecca gets to the office. Crying time's over. They all stared at me unmoving, but the crying had stopped. I'm sorry, did I stutter? No, sir, they answered. It was the trained response. Anytime I said the phrase, did I stutter, it was a sign that they needed to get active. Andrea gave Rebecca a hug and then ran out with her bag to the gym. Eric waited for Rebecca to get up, and then I watched her wheel him out of the office towards the front desk. I stayed behind with Elizabeth, who looked a little annoyed. I don't think that was wise, Mr. Grissetti. Letting her sit there in a dark room to cry her eyes out around her friends wasn't going to help her, I answered simply. Oh, so you're a psychologist now. No, but I've been teaching a while. When girls get bullied and have a fit, letting them wallow in it for too long will only make them become addicted to the pity party. She needs to pick herself up, and quick, I replied. She needs her friends. She needs to know that there are people who don't see her as a dangerous freak, Elizabeth snapped. I agree, I answered. But this isn't the place to do it, especially not right after that treatment the boys gave her, so I have a proposition. Elizabeth placed her hands on her hips, her snake hair writhing a little. Well, I'm listening. Let's start an after-school program for the Edenites, I offered. It can be once or twice a week. They can even meet in my room. What? It's clear that the Edenites aren't getting along well with the human kids, and their school life is suffering due to bullying and self-esteem issues, I pointed out. We need them to feel comfortable again, and if they can feel like they aren't alone and can have people to talk to listen to, then they can better handle their situations with them. Well, that's a nice thought, but it's not the point of what we're trying to accomplish, Elizabeth sighed. The goal of the exchange program is for Edenites to grow more used to human society. They're children, I practically shouted. You can't expect a child to just naturally get used to a new environment right off the bat without any warning or explanation. They're in a world they barely know, surrounded by kids who feel inadequate themselves, so are now lashing out at them because it's easy. I know they need to learn to adapt, but if they're going to survive at all, they need to lean on each other. So you just want all the Edenite students to meet in your room after school once a week. What will they do there? I'll bring snacks. And they can do whatever the hell they want. Play a board game, tell stories, whatever. These kids, they need the socialization. It will keep them sane long enough to learn how to survive, I argued. Elizabeth crossed her arms and looked down at the ground, tapping her heel a few times and biting her lip. I don't know about this. It sounds nice, but you're not an Edenite yourself. So how can you even relate to these kids? I looked at her for a long moment and then placed my hands in my pockets. You don't have to be from Eden to be called a freak, I confessed. I was teased a lot growing up, too. Lots of normal kids are. But what helped me was getting involved in clubs and sports and things that kept me going. Sure, I'm not an Edenite. I'm human, but I get what it feels like to be left out. I've lived it, and I've seen enough to know it. I'm sorry, Elizabeth finally said. I feel like I've been a little unfair to you in all this. Look, don't worry about it. No, I have a request, if I may, she asked. I'd like to sit in on these after-school meetings with you, if you get permission to do them from the principal. Perhaps if you have an adult Edenite there, that'll help the kids a little bit. I nodded my approval. Well, now we just have to convince Principal Hardy. Leave that to me, Elizabeth shrugged. If I say it's in the best interest for the Edenite students, he'll listen to me. I finally made my way to the classroom to see Rebecca already inside with her mother, who looked remarkably like her, only much older, probably in her mid to early 40s. She had a very worried expression, and there was a flecks of gray in some of the strands of her dark hair. Oh, Mr. Grissetti, she said, I'm sorry my daughter hasn't been doing her best, and... I know, I interrupted. I wanted to speak with you both about her grades, but before we get into that, I want to ask you a question. My eyes fell on Rebecca, and I smiled warmly. Would you like to be part of a little after-school program we're starting? Edenite exclusive. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. No matter what your degree, or how many years you take in college, you will never be ready for the students you're going to teach, or the ones you're going to help. And that is the last Edenite story I have. All right. Well, I know y'all take some time to think about what I just read while I jump over to New Epoch, because I need to remember where we left off. It's been a while. I think we left off on chapter 18. I think that's where we left off. Yeah, you'll notice that the Edenite stories are very much, they're very much wholesome. They're very simple. And yeah, that was kind of the point. I wanted them to be kind of slice of life, kind of nice stories about people learning about each other. Because let me tell you something that I think is a real problem. And this is me going on a slight tangent. One of the problems that I see in the world today is that people take discrimination to a level it really shouldn't. And what I mean by that is this. We're all different, okay? We're all different to some way, shape, or form. Different genders, different races, different religions, different ideologies, different ideas, different outlooks, different experiences. The idea that all people are equal is absurd. We're all different to some extent, and that's a good thing. If we were all equal 100%, we'd all be the same gender, we'd all be the same race, we'd all be the same experience. It'd be boring as hell. We're all different, and I think understanding those differences is beautiful as long as it's done in the proper context, because there are two sides to it. Either you respect difference or you hate difference. When you hate difference, that's called bigotry and discrimination. When you embrace difference, that is called acceptance. Now, here's the reality. I think there's a middle ground, because if you over-accept to the point that you dismiss what you are, because I've seen people do that. Like I met this girl who basically thought that Japan was the Holy Land. She loved everything about Japan to the point that she denigrated and disrespected Western culture just to make Japanese culture look better. And even our Japanese professor thought that she was weird for it. And then you have the people who discriminate to the point that it's like they can't. I've had people say that they think that because I'm white, because I'm a white person, I am the devil, and that I will never see the kingdom of God because I'm white and white people don't deserve it. And I'm like, wow, okay. So there's a middle ground there. And when I wrote the Edenite stories, I wanted to explore that difference and how difference could be dealt with. You'll notice in this story in particular, I was exploring how discrimination can affect kids in this setting. And I also explored that in my other Edenite stories, because difference and understanding difference helps us understand the world. And when I say difference, I don't mean just preconceived difference. I mean actual difference. Like, for example, people who like to say, I'm a victim because of what I've been through. I'm like, well, what did you go through? And I feel like that's something that requires a better context to go fully into. But I really did want to explore that. I really want to explore that difference. I wanted to explore how people treat each other. And I wanted to explore different ways in which we deal with that. And writing a teacher who tried to find a way to help these kids learn and understand each other, I thought that would be a creative idea. So that is where I wanted to go with that. Reminded me of that Fairly Odd Parents episode where Timmy tried to solve racism by turning everyone into gray blobs. Yeah, because that's the thing. When everyone's the same, it's all boring. You know, there should be differences. There should be, like, I think that there is real. I think there's a lot cool about black people in the black community, the Asian people in the Asian community. I think that women are cool and unique in various ways. I think the idea that when people say, well, you know, we're all 100% equal, I'm like, we're not really. We treat each other differently for various reasons, not just based on race or gender, but also based on what we do. Like, for example, when I work at Longhorns, I treated different servers differently based on what they were capable of. I have some servers who are not very strong yet. They're not good at the job, so I don't give them as many seats as other servers who are great at the job and can handle a lot of seats. Like Judy, I give her 5 or 6 tables because I know she can handle it. But Allison, she struggles a bit. She's not quite there yet, so... You know, like, I treat them differently. It's not because I think that one's better than the other or one's naturally superior. Like, there's one lady, and there's another lady there named Margarita. Margarita's black, and she's super friendly to me. She's super nice. She's super amiable. I love working with her. She helps me out. She is one of the coolest people I've ever met. But there's another young man there who is black who treats me like crap, and so I treat him like crap. You know, it's the same thing. It's like I don't treat them differently because of their race. I treat them differently because of how they treat me. You know? So the idea that we just treat everyone equally, I believe that we treat people how I would want to be treated. I think that's what it comes down to. Not necessarily equally, but how I would want to be treated and how they need to be treated in the right circumstance. There are some people who, when they're crying, I know they need a hand to hold. They need someone to hold them. They need someone to hug them. Then there are other people who I know who are crying, and it's like, I just need to stand back and let them do it, you know? It's not because I think less of one person than the other. It's because I know this person and what they need. So, I'll get off my soapbox now, but I just wanted to share that. Okay. Sorry, guys. My back is really sore. I pulled a muscle in my back working today. Ow. Okay, back to it. Here we go. So we are on New Epoch Chapter 18. I hope you guys are excited. Here we go. If y'all don't remember what happened last time, Josiah is defeated. Titania and Blemish are settling into their new roles. Blemish is starting to see Titania as a mother figure, and Titania doesn't know how she feels about that. And the Inquisition has arrived, and they are taking over the town of Orkshire, and Vivienne, the leader of the Inquisition forces, has said that she will be able to lead Orkshire and allow non-human races to live in peace, but there's 2 catches. She's going to expel or kill all the orcs, and she has to put Titania to death because the Inquisition is afraid of what a powerful ogre like her could do. And she explains that if these conditions aren't met, then the Inquisition will remove her as the governess of Orkshire and put someone else there who's not nearly as amiable and nice. So that's a problem. We also have a situation where Mariel has met this young boy who dreams of rebuilding Orkshire into what it used to be, but he doesn't have the money for it. So we're about to learn more about that. Hannah, you're getting old, Raven. I'm 31 years old, but I sometimes feel like I'm 50. You know, get respect when you earn respect. That doesn't necessarily mean you should open with disrespect either. Oh, absolutely. I don't think you should ever open with disrespect. I think that's the thing. What you do is you treat others the way you would want to be treated, and when they give you reason not to, you walk away. Yeah, you walk away at that point, because I think it's wrong to treat anyone like crap for any reason. Like, you shouldn't piss on someone just because you don't like them. Well, that doesn't make you look better. It just makes you look vindictive and cruel. And I know that I'm one to talk. I've made a lot of response videos where I've called out people for sure. And I'm sure that there are people who would love to call me out, you know? And sure, I don't mind criticism. Criticism is fine. I need to learn how to take it better, but criticism is fine. But I think that when you treat someone like crap for no good reason, that's just wrong, you know? But anyway, here we go. Let's get into New Epoch. Let's move on. Blemish liked the woods just fine, but perhaps they were too quiet for him tonight. He didn't like to be alone with his thoughts right now because his thoughts terrified him more than any mission he'd ever been on. What could he say or do at this point? He wandered about the wooded forest, staring up at the dark trees, noticing the dark red hue that they left. He thought about Titania reading with him, telling him stories, reminding him that he mattered. Why did her words mean so much to him? Well, the answer was obvious, but also impossible to comprehend. Blemish was a killer of heretics and monsters, and what race embodied that more than ogres? And now he was playing house with an ogress. It seemed so simple before when he was working with her to kill Josiah, but now the mission was done. He should leave. It's time to report in and leave Titania behind. Her reward for help would be her life. Wasn't that what she deserved? Why am I so confused? He asked. It should be simple, but it simply isn't. He stopped at a nearby tree and began plucking off wooden limbs and branches for the kindling. As he did so, his eyes fell upon the ground tucked beneath the roots of the tree nearest him with something that seemed to glint, flashing beautifully at him briefly, but then vanished when he turned his head and shifted. Curiously, he stooped down and picked up the shiny object. It was a coin. A simple coin. He'd seen these from time to time when traveling. According to the Watchers, these were used as currency before the Cataclysm. They were some kind of monetary value before gold and gemstones were introduced. He turned it over in his fingers, letting the old coin feel cool on his skin. He felt as if he'd seen it before. And then he remembered. Long ago. Watcher Martin, one of his handlers, had a coin just like this one, and he used to flip it from time to time. What was it that Watcher Martin used to say about this particular coin? He called it a $50. Slowly, the memories began to slip back into his consciousness from years ago. So many years ago. Call it, kid, Watcher Martin had said, flipping the coin high in the air. Blemish was confused. Call what? What will it land on, heads or tails? Why does it matter? Blemish asked. And it's just a coin. It doesn't have a head or a tail. God in heaven, I keep forgetting how stupid you are, Martin had laughed. The head and tail are the two sides of the coin. The head is the one with the human head on, and the tail doesn't. See? He held out the coin to show Blemish, who quickly caught on. So which will it be, heads or tails? I don't understand why it matters. It doesn't matter, Martin growled. It's just a stupid coin toss, kid. I flip it, you call it, and we see who wins. What do I win? Blemish asked. Martin sighed and shook his head. Man, you can really suck the fun out of anything. It's just a coin toss, you brat. Blemish didn't understand. If it was just a coin, why did Martin find fun in flipping it and asking others to guess what side it landed on? And if there was nothing to win, why bother? Or was there something to win after all? Maybe there was something to be expected. Martin started to walk away. No, I'll guess, Blemish cried, now interested in seeing what would happen when he guessed. Martin stopped and smiled a wry and excited smirk before turning and flipping the coin and catching it. He placed the coin on his hand, covered. Call it. Heads. Martin removed his hand and laughed. Tails, haha, you lose. Blemish waited for the pain to hit. Waited for the lash, or for a sudden shock, or for lightning to strike him. But nothing happened. What was supposed to happen if he lost? So what happens now? I don't understand. Well, nothing happens. It's a dumb coin toss game, and the... What are you two doing? Both Blemish and Watcher Martin fell to one knee at the sound of the voice. In walked a tall and skinny man with graying hair and a beard. He had almost yellowish brown eyes that looked sickly and frightening. He sneered at them, and he pulled off his hood to show his face. Though he wore the robes of the divine, a high watcher of the Inquisition, and the highest authority that Blemish answered to. This was High Watcher Solomon, advisor and councilman to the Lord High Inquisitor. He growled down at them and put his foot on Blemish's hand, pressed down. Blemish winced at the pain, but did not cry out. He would endure it. To cry out was a sin. Fooling around when there's work to be done. I can explain, sir, Martin cried. I'm sure it would be a lie, God curse you, Solomon hissed. I will ask this Blemish to explain it to me. He turned his eye to Blemish, who gulped. Sir, Watcher Martin was teaching me a game with tossing a coin and guessing the sides. I am trying to understand its meaning. Martin pressed his forehead to the floor in shame. Forgive me, sir. It was just innocent fun. I was just... What a fascinating idea, Solomon laughed. Blemish and Martin both looked up in surprise as Solomon was... smiling. Solomon never smiled. The High Watcher was almost never happy, but here he was smiling. A coin toss's meaning? That's an intriguing notion, Blemish. Shall I help you understand its meaning? Please, High Watcher Solomon, Blemish pleaded. Solomon turned to Martin and Blemish and bade them stand up. Both shakily rose to their feet. Questioningly, Solomon took out his own coin, only slightly smaller than Martin's. This coin is called a quarter. Have you seen it before, brat? No, sir. Martin stayed completely quiet, fearful that if he spoke, he would be shouted at. Solomon placed the coin delicately on his thumb and then flipped it, like Martin had. He caught it and placed it on his hand, covering it. His eyes then fell on Blemish, and he sneered. Consider something, brat. From the moment you crawled screaming out of your worthless mother, the Lord of Heaven has seen you from one catastrophe to the next. He allowed your body to be tainted and mutated into a half-breed, and now you are in our service. All of this has led to this moment, to this decision you're about to make. Is it really that important, sir? Oh, it's everything, boy. And yet it's still just a coin. Now call it. Tails. Solomon removed his hand and smiled. Tails it is. Well done, you brat. Seems the Lord has granted you a victory. He then flipped it again and caught it, hiding it, turning to Martin. How about you, Watcher Martin? I call heads. Solomon removed his hand and looked, tutting. I'm afraid it's tails. Watcher Martin didn't even have time to respond before the High Watcher pulled a handgun from his robes and blasted a hole clean through Martin's eye, sending him sprawling to the ground. Blemish stared in horror at what had just happened as the High Watcher carelessly put away the gun and flipped the coin again before stashing it away. He lost, High Watcher Solomon hissed. Remember this well, Blemish, for you are every bit like that coin. You want to know the meaning of a coin toss? You now know it. In this life, you are constantly brought to key points where a single decision may make the most crucial difference, and you may not even be aware of it. The Lord chooses who he takes and who he uses. You are chosen to live a while longer with your cursed existence, and that is because of the choice you made. You made the right one. But Martin, clearly the Lord has called him home. Is a coin really so meaningful? Blemish squeaked, staring at the body of Martin again. No, it's just a coin, Solomon chuckled. It's a worthless piece of metal. But in the proper context, it signifies increases tenfold. Much like you worthless blemish. And what context shall you find yourself in? I'm a coin being tossed, Blemish whispered. That's what the High Watcher meant. I'm the deciding factor, the mitigating context. The decision I make is the most crucial of all. But what is the decision I need to make? Back in the present, as Blemish made his way back from the forest carrying the logs, he saw a faint glow ahead of him, and he froze. The heat of a fire being felt, and it was enormous. Panic-stricken, he ran to the side of the glow, dropping the firewood behind him, and now able to see what was glowing so brightly. Titania's cabin. It was ablaze. Fire engulfed it with tenacious and ravenous hunger, devouring the entire building. Surrounding the grass were at least 7 bodies of dead Inquisition knights, bloodied and mangled. The wooden roof was broken into pieces, and the smoke from the cabin was reaching up to heaven to announce its going. Blemish watched as the richly built and lovely cabin fell to pieces before his eyes, logs and lumber turning black and collapsing. "Titania!" he screamed. "Titania!" He started to run to the fire. "She's not here." Blemish stopped again and saw another figure walk towards him. He had on black attire that made him meld into the dark, but a red pair of wings were engraved on his chest armor and back. He had an arming sword on his hip and several daggers latched to his waist. He had familiar features, and for a moment Blemish didn't think he could recognize him, but then it occurred to him, the striking resemblance from earlier that day. "Michael?" he cried. "You were the boy with Mariel." "The same," he answered, the innocent and inquisitive voice now replaced with cold and joyless cheers. "To think that you couldn't tell who I was at a glance, Blemish. You're as useless as I'd assumed you'd be." Blemish recognized the red wings, the mark of an archangel of the Inquisition, just like him. "You're an archangel?" Blemish gasped, his hands trembling, tempted to go to his swords, but stopping themselves. "I am." "And what are you exactly?" he asked. "Should I call you an archangel? Word is you couldn't even defeat the High Orc on your own. You needed an ogress and a dwarf to help you? Have you no shame? You should have reported back immediately, or at least killed yourself on the spot." Blemish grit his teeth angrily, but not at Michael, with himself. "Tell me, Blemish, what do you have to say for yourself?" No. Where's Titania? Blemish asked. For God's sake, you bastard, you still care about that heathen beast? She's the enemy! And tomorrow she will face public execution in the Citadel Square. Michael sneered. You can't, Blemish reasoned. She helped defeat Josiah. She's not evil. Michael lunged forward fast and brought a dagger from his belt, holding it out to Blemish, who had just drawn his own short sword and was ready to defend, but both froze in position, inches away from their own killing blows. Do you hear yourself? Michael asked. Are you not disgusted with the spit coming out of your mouth? You would defend your enemy. Our enemy. The Governess Vivienne might have held me back from slaying the elves, dwarves, and halflings of this land, but that ogress is different. You saw her horn, right? She's not a full-fledged ogress yet, and she's without a clan. She was still, though, able to go toe-to-toe with a high orc. Can you imagine how dangerous she'll be once she grows up, once she's reached her full potential? If she becomes a full-grown ogress, even the archangels would struggle against that power. Just look at what she did when we came to arrest her tonight. She killed 7 inquisitorial soldiers and was able to hold me back for a while. She must die. She cannot live and pose a threat to our control here. You must have thought this way too. Blemish didn't answer, but his silence was the only answer Michael needed. So you have thought it. You do recognize the threat she poses. When I came here today with that fake bag of coins and jewels, I knew what I needed to do the moment I laid eyes on her, but you just stood there. Why have you not killed her? Titania, she's incredibly dangerous to the Inquisition. You're right, and when she matures and gains her full ogress power, her power could be nightmarish. But I've been observing her. I don't think she has any intention of attacking or hurting us. Her existence itself is a blight, Michael spat. Blemish winced, and they both lowered their guards. Surely you can relate to that state of being. I can. Then you understand the Inquisition's position on this? He asked. Blemish again nodded his head but said nothing, taking in the reality of his sentence. Then I bear a message for you, Blemish. This is directly from the High Watcher Solomon himself. High Watcher Solomon? Blemish gasped. He says that your failure to complete your mission is a disgrace, but more disgusting is your willingness to fraternize with known enemies of the Lord. You must prove your loyalty to the Inquisition before returning to her fold. You are to report tomorrow evening at sundown to partake in the execution of the ogress Titania. Failure to do this will result in excommunication. Michael turned on his heel and walked away down the hill. Enjoy the bonfire I left you. As he walked down the hill and walked away, disappearing into the night, Blemish turned his eyes back to the fire that was burning in front of him. His home. The home he thought he'd found was being ripped from his fingers in blazing embers. A coin toss, he whispered. I am nothing. I'm just a coin. But the decision I make, the choice that I go with, makes all the difference. He then sat down in front of the burning cabin and weighed his options in his mind. The Inquisition was right to be afraid of Titania. She was unspeakably dangerous if she kept growing in strength. And Blemish had to admit that he wasn't anything like her. She had been so kind to him. But could this continue as it was? These thoughts floated around in his heart, and he felt tears build in his eyes. Lord God in heaven, I am a worthless Blemish and a half-breed. But if Titania is right and you care about me anyway, please, please show me what to do. I am scared. What do I do? Is Titania a heretic? As he bowed his head, the answer was again made clear. Titania was a heathen beast, a monster, an enemy of the Inquisition and all it stood for. The solution to everything was clear. After a long and somber contemplation, closing his eyes, the coin called Blemish made his call. And that is the end of chapter 18. Good stuff. Hope you guys enjoyed that. I'm enjoying the series. I love the story. Anyway, hope you guys liked that. Let me know if you liked it while I take a moment to stretch my back. Hannah, what did you think? Because you've been popping in and out. What did you think of the story? Well, while you type your answer, I'm going to go ahead and get ready to go to the next part. And Mal is awfully silent. Mal's the one who always goes, read more to Epoch. Raven, I had to leave for a moment. How many new Epoch chapters did you read? Just that one. That one's the first one I read tonight. And dun dun dun. All right, well, in that case, let's go ahead and move on. We are moving on to chapter 19. I wrote chapter 19 on May 12th, 2020. So here we go. I wish Adamar had more lore. Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. Sustained. Anyway. All right. Here we go. New Epoch, chapter 19. Philip had been drunk more than a few times, and he'd had several killer hangovers. He had even become a sort of an artisan of the hangover headache. It goes without saying that as he sat up now, he immediately began to wonder what kind of hangover he was about to experience. But to his surprise, this felt worse than any hangover he'd ever had. The ground beneath him was not a bed, but a hard, cold floor surrounded by rubble and metal debris. There was a single small window looking out at the town beyond, letting moonlight into the room. He rubbed his aching head, which felt like it was being ripped apart, and he felt a bandage on the side of it where the pain was strongest. He let out a grunt of shock at the pain and winced. Don't move around too much. He glanced up to see Mariel sitting beside him, helping him to sit up straight. Are you all right? You've been out for hours. Hours? Damn, how much did I have to drink? You didn't drink anything, said the first voice from the corner of the room, snarled. Philip immediately recognized it as Aenor, the medic elf. He had his arms crossed, looking as if he'd been sucking sour candies all evening, with a grim and disgusted look on his face. Frankly, you took such a knock to the head, I'm certain you have a concussion. As Phil looked around at the stone walls and the cold, wet roof above his head, he began to realize that they were in a prison cell, one of the many cells beneath the museum at the Citadel. It was where Josiah used to store his unwanted issues. Shit! Well, how'd I get hit? That little brat Michael, Mariel snapped. I can't believe I fell for it. The whole time, he was an archangel. Philip blinked a few times, trying to comprehend what he'd just heard. That boy with the gym bag, the one who said he wanted to rebuild Orkshire, was an archangel? He was never interested in the gems, Aenor said. He just needed someone to lead him to Titania's cabin. And that's exactly what he tricked me into doing, Mariel cried. I'm such an idiot! Curling up and burying her face in her arms in a childish fetal position. Aenor shook his head, long ears poking out of his hair. Don't blame yourself, young lady. To be honest, deception is his specialty. But I handed us all to him on a silver platter. He's got you, me, Philip. I don't know about Grognar, though, Mariel admitted. Well, last I heard, Grognar was making some kind of treaty or agreement with the new governess, Aenor explained. But I wonder about the demon and Blemish. Well, maybe Blemish was in on it, Philip laughed. Would have been a nice little piece of irony, wouldn't it? Risk all our asses to save that little turd, and he turns right around and hands us over. Well, Blemish wouldn't do that, Mariel argued. He's nothing like Michael. You should have seen how he acted when he came back to the cabin with the Inquisition. Mariel shuddered at the dark and horrifying memories. That Michael, he looked so scary. Like there wasn't a shred of humanity in him. Or is he more human than any of us? Aenor asked knowingly. Philip looked at him confused, and Aenor shrugged, looking out the window from where he sat. Do you have something to say, elf? It's been 10 years, Philip. In that time, what's the world come to? Anarchy, chaos, wars, and an inquisition built by humans with the sole purpose of purging the world of all other races. Has humanity become monstrous in these 10 years, or are we finally seeing mankind for what it is after all this time? As a human, I quite resent that remark, Philip snapped, and don't you dare compare the rest of us to the Inquisition. I've seen what they do to towns and villages that don't submit, and I've seen orcs and ogres with more sympathy. Perhaps you shouldn't be so quick to lump us all... I'm sorry, I choked on something. Hold on. Yeah. I don't know what I choked on. Sorry. Back to it. Perhaps you shouldn't be so quick to lump all us Inquisition types together, you think? Philip spun around as Mariel jumped to her feet. Aenor merely turned his head to face the woman now standing at the door to their cell. Vivian stood there in her attire, befitting a high priestess of the Inquisition. She looked genuinely displeased, like she was disgusted with the state of the gate door between her and them. "You filthy old Philip, stop!" Mariel cried, grabbing Philip before he flung himself at the door. He then collapsed, nearly puking all over the floor, his head swimming. "Yep, you have a concussion," Aenor grumbled. "Look, I'm sure you're angry at me, but I assure you that all of you will be released tomorrow afternoon," Vivian explained. "I apologize for the harsh treatment and incarceration, but I felt it necessary for tomorrow morning's events." "Oh, well, I guess if you have a reason, then it's all fine, right?" Philip spat sarcastically. "Why don't we all just meet up for tea tomorrow and we can laugh about my goddamn headache and wet bollocks thanks to that damp floor?" "I know it's not ideal, but you have to stomach it," Vivian explained. "Where's Blemish?" Mariel asked. "We're not sure right now, but I understand that Archangel Michael made contact with him. I'm sure they're doing whatever Archangel business there is to do, and the less I know about that, the better," she shivered. "You're an Inquisitor, and you don't know what Archangels do in their spare time?" Aenor asked, amused. "The Archangels are direct servants of the High Watcher Solomon. I have no connection to him," she sighed and shook her head. "I take orders from Father Nicodemus, the Ecclesiarch of the Inquisitorial Crusader Command. We have no ties or control to the Archangels. However, I've given strict orders not to harm any of you, just simply to keep you under control until after the execution." "Execution?" Mariel cried. "Yes. I'm afraid that the ogress Titania will be put to death tomorrow morning," Vivian answered. Philip's eyes widened and he rose again to his feet. Mariel covered her mouth while Aenor just closed his eyes in reverence to the news. "You can't! You can't!" "She's too dangerous to be allowed to remain. Her power exceeds that of a most immature ogre," Vivian explained. "She hasn't even reached full maturity yet and was able to hold her own against a high orc." "Maturity? Come on, Titania's an adult," Mariel cried. "Ogres aren't like humans," Philip explained. "I'll explain it to you later, after I fucking get us out of here!" Philip flung himself at the gate, smashing against the metal bars and grunting from the headache and the pain of failure. Vivian shook her head. "You really must calm down," she explained. "I know this isn't ideal, but I'm afraid this was part of the condition that came with my governess position. I simply came by to check on your condition since Michael was quite rough with you." She then took a step back. "Seeing as you're lively enough to smash your face into a gate of iron, you must be feeling better. I'll be back tomorrow afternoon to free you." "You better run!" Philip bellowed as she walked off. "Cowards! All the Inquisition are goddamn cowards! Her, Michael, and Blemish too. Why didn't he help Titania? He could have fought back. He could have done something. He was at the cabin too, right? Titania took care of that little shit, right? She doted on him, like she squeezed him out of her own—" "Philip," Aenor interjected. "Yes, shut up," he growled. "Bitching about what's happened doesn't change anything." "Oh, well, hello there, Pot. I don't believe we've met. But my name's Kettle. I thought you should know that you're black," Philip sneered. Aenor's eyes suddenly glared daggers at Philip dangerously. "You want to say something, you brat?" "Lots of things. Let's start with your dead fucking wife and work our way to the totem pole baggage you won't drop." The usually calm and collected Aenor rose to his feet swiftly, and Philip was already raising his fist to pummel him into the ground. "You say one more word about my wife, and I swear—" "Stop it!" Mariel screamed, shoving both away from each other. "I don't know what you two are talking about, and I really don't care. Titania is going to die in a few hours, and all you two can do is argue?" Aenor sat back down and crossed his arms. "Look, she's your friend, and I get that, but I can't say I blame Vivian that much. She made a point." "You mean about her not being mature?" "I don't even understand what that means," Mariel asked. "Like I said, ogres don't reach adulthood based on age like humans do. All ogres are born with a horn to mark their race, or two horns, it depends. And as they grow stronger and more battle-hardened, their bodies undergo a week of metamorphosis that they call the demon's breath. They grow larger, their single horn begins to grow longer as well, and they turn a slightly shade of red, I guess darker," concluded. "In their adult phase, they're twice as strong, twice as fierce, and have fewer limitations to their aggression. The fact that an immature ogress like Titania could hold her own against a high orc is unusual, and the idea of how dangerous she could become if she does mature is something that I don't want to think about." "You think they're that scared of Titania that if she's this strong now, if she were to, I don't know, reach, I guess, puberty, she would, be even more dangerous?"
Of course they are, Anna responded darkly. An angry, blood-crazed ogre is a terrifying thing. They destroy everything in their path, killing everything, and without restraint. Titania is immature now, but if she were to mature, it's better this way. Speaking from experience, Philip challenged. Aenor turned away from him furiously. There was a dead silence through the entire hall. No one spoke, but only contemplated how much trouble they were in if they didn't think of something soon. None of them were cognizant of the looming shadow that was coming towards them, a dagger in hand. Titania was on her knees in her single cell. Her arms and head were locked in a makeshift set of stocks, with her wrists and ankles chained to the walls. She couldn't have escaped even if she was at full strength. She had scars and bruises all over her from the brawl with the Inquisition soldiers. She was far stronger than the orcs she was used to fighting to, and it was a miracle she'd managed to hold out as long as she had against them. But now her home was in cinders, and all of her weapons and supplies were gone. Her Bible, her books, her keepsakes. It was all gone. She then thought to her family, her mother and father, who still had no idea she was alive. Would they see her on the chopping block tomorrow? Were they going to recognize her? If they did, how would they feel about seeing their child alive only to die again in front of them? It brought tears to her eyes. She forgot she could shed as she bit her lip with her sharp canines. Titania had to admit it. Fear. She felt genuine fear. She didn't want to die. It wasn't the fear of death, it was the fear of facing the world like this, weakened and vulnerable. It was a thing she'd feared ever since becoming an ogress. Changing into an ogre, in retrospect, wasn't that bad, but losing her masculinity had made her feel so exposed and weaker. And so she'd worked hard to make up for that by fighting, seeking challenges, hunting, and doing everything she could to mask that truth. And then Blemish came, and he changed something in her. She couldn't place what, but she felt an attachment to him, a need to help him out of his stupor and to support him. It was a most surreal sensation, but when she thought of him, she couldn't help but wonder if he was okay. She, of course, speculated if he betrayed her, but he couldn't have. Could he? She was broken out of her stupor by sensing a presence outside her gate. She glanced up to see a blonde-haired woman standing there in inquisitorial clothing. She looked drastically important, and beside her was a little shit who managed to finally defeat her and subdue her. He wasn't smiling triumphantly, but he did have a smug twinkle to his glare. "Titania," the woman said, "I'm Vivienne, High Priestess and Governess of Orkshire." Titania didn't answer her, just kept her head bowed with her eyes on the ground, not willing to meet them. She simply stayed quiet. "I'm sorry we had to meet under these circumstances." No answer. "I wanted to see you once before the execution tomorrow," she explained. "And I wanted to thank you for your contribution to the defeat of Josiah. For an ogress like you to overpower a high orc is nothing to ignore." No response. "I guess she's not in the mood for talking," Michael grumbled. "I told you it was a waste of time, High Priestess." "Your input is not necessary, Archangel," Vivienne barked. Michael chuckled and shook his young head, rolling his eyes. "Is there anything we can do for you? A last request, perhaps? Do you have family that you'd like to see?" Titania's head perked slightly in realization. She thought for a moment about it, but then grit her teeth and hissed. No. She couldn't face that. She couldn't face them. She was dead to them, and dead she needed to stay, though that truth crushed her heart more than it already was. By her reaction, I'd say that she'd rather not let them see her this way. How could that brat read her like a book, Titania thought. "What happened to Blemish?" Titania finally asked darkly. Michael laughed and shook his head. "That's all you care about. The weakling is on his own quarters on the other side of the compound waiting to chop your head off tomorrow. Don't worry, you'll see him as he puts you down like a dog." "That's enough!" Vivienne snapped. "Michael, leave here at once." "As you wish, Governess," Michael replied with a bow and then walked away. After making sure that he was gone, Vivienne placed her fingers around the bar of the door, looking to Titania with something close to sympathy. She couldn't see Titania's face as it was lowered and looking to the floor, hair covered in her view. "Titania, I'm not speaking to you as a priestess. I'm speaking to you, woman to woman. I am truly sorry it had to be this way. Please, is there anyone I can bring to see you? Is there anything I can do to help you in your final hours?" She didn't answer her. Her body simply went slack, no longer having the strength to stay stoic. She shivered and she whimpered. Vivienne stared at Titania a long moment, long enough to see tears drop to the ground beneath her. each tear shed like the hope she lost. Blemished her family, all of her friends, gone. Now here she knelt, waiting for the very boy she'd wanted so much to save to come and execute her. There was no hope for the demon who waited for the agent of God to slay her. And that is the chapter. We can get something to drink real quick. Yeah, it's getting real, guys. It's getting real. Raven, real question. Do you prefer writing in the first or third person? I do it naturally in the first person because I speak with a lot of voice, like I speak from myself a lot. But I prefer writing in third person because it creates a unique feel to what I'm creating. So that would be my answer to that. All right, well, do y'all want me to go into chapter 20? Or do y'all want me to read something else? Let me know in the comments while I refill my water. I need some more water. My back. Ow, 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 ow. I really did pull a muscle. Ow. All right, I'm back. Oof. All right. You want me to continue? Okay. We can continue. Oof. Okay. Shoot. What are you drinking? Water. We'll read Monster Club maybe last tonight. We'll see. We'll see how things go, because I'm scared to start another long story before I finish with what I've got on New Epoch. All right. Here we go. Hannah, what do you think so far? I'd love your thoughts. And Mal, too. I'd love Mal's thoughts, because those are the two who really like the story. In fact, true story, guys. Hannah actually knew about the story back when I was first writing it, but she never really got that into it. She was just kind of like, it seems okay, but it's not really something that I'm into. Ever since I started reading it on this series, she has actually told me how interested she's become, so I'm very glad that she's interested. I'm very glad that she's starting to enjoy it. How many chapters do you have left for New Epoch? I think I have 31 chapters written. I have 31 chapters written, so we'll see. I kind of forgot this stuff happened. Yeah, Hannah, I don't know if you read all the way through New Epoch. I think you may have read the first few chapters, but then kind of quit. And I'm not saying that to be mean. Just if you weren't interested, you weren't interested. But I'm glad you're interested. But I hope you're enjoying. But anyway, here we go. Let's keep going. Chapter 20. I wrote this on May 19th, 2020. Here we go. Ragnar paced back and forth in his house, puffing his pipe furiously as he tugged on his beard. This had become one of his many nervous habits since becoming a dwarf, and he couldn't explain why he did it, because more often than not, it just left him with a sore chin, as he might accidentally tug a hair too hard. But it's what he did. He growled and cursed behind his teeth as he smoked. Grognar? The irritated dwarf stopped pacing and turned around to see behind him. A little girl had poked her head in. To the common eye, she might look almost 6 or 7, but her real age was closer to 13. Halflings always looked half as old as they really were. Halflings were considered by the Inquisition to represent the son of sloth. They were characterized as lazy and unwilling to work more than necessary. This was indeed due to, in part, their most relaxed and laid-back nature, but also because of their psychology. Halflings looked like little more than children, and only started showing real maturity or age by the time they were well within their 70s or 80s, meaning that there was little to distinguish a halfling from a child most of the time. But there were clues, such as their larger-than-average feet, which grew fair hair all over the toes and tops of their bare feet, The soles of a halfling's feet were rough and coarse, easily ripping up socks and coverings, so most halflings just chose not to wear them. Another distinguishing feature were their ears, as halflings had rather round and noticeable ears. Grognar's sister, Rose, had all of these features. Rose's real name had once been Sarah, but had changed her name as not only had she become a halfling, but her once raven black hair had turned a lovely rose color. She tiptoed into Grognar's room, looking up at her brother. Halflings were only a few inches shorter than dwarves at their full height, but since Rose was still rather young, she didn't quite make it to Grognar's chest, though she could easily grab his beard if she wanted to.
Rose, sorry, I didn't mean to wake you, he asked.
You were cursing pretty loudly, she sighed. You didn't talk to Mom or me when you got back, and I'm a bit worried.
I'm worried too, Rose, he admitted.
Want to talk about it? She asked.
It amazed Grognar sometimes when he looked at Rose, how unexpectedly mature she could be for her age, but then what else could she do in this world? So many young children robbed of their childhood and playful nature just to survive, forced to grow up and contribute as soon as the risk of it being tossed aside. Then suddenly his thoughts turned back to blemish, and began to groan, realizing the connection there.
Titania will be executed tomorrow, he explained.
The demon of the mountains? Wait, I thought she helped take down Josiah. Why would they want to?
Because they want to make her an example to tell all other non-humans in Orkshire that they mean business, and to prevent her from becoming a problem later, Grognar explained. And I don't like it. I tried negotiating with the High Priestess Vivian. She seems like a reasonable woman. I thought I could help sway her. Just let Titania go, banish her or something. Just let her live.
Well, why won't she banish her?
Rose asked curiously. Grognar looked at her cautiously. Could he tell her? Did he have the right to tell her what he knows? Rose didn't know about Titania's real identity, and despite her maturity, she was still unaware of the Inquisition's resentment of all things non-human. Sure, she had an idea, but she didn't grasp the deepness of it. Grognar could feel it in the air around them like a moldy stench. It felt similar to Josiah's, but where Josiah's had been malicious and aggressively noxious, this was a burning and aching aroma of danger. Vivian seemed trustworthy, but even with that consideration, she was just as powerless as Grognar. She was at the whim of the Inquisition. The Inquisition, though willing to negotiate, was clearly going to make a precedent known. That non-humans that are deemed too dangerous will be put down, and we can define dangers however we damn well please.
Grognar?
Rose asked, noticing him glaring off away from her.
Titania is an ogress, and the Inquisition just hates them especially, kind of like orcs.
Well, she helped fight Josiah. She can't be all that bad, Rose grumbled. But why are you so upset? I mean, are you going to try and help her?
I don't know, kid, Grognar sighed, sitting down. I want to help her, but I have no idea how. If I openly try to rescue her, I'll be branded a traitor and I'll be executed too. If I subtly try to help her, which I don't know how I'd even try to do that, I don't know where she'd be able to go. But at the same time, if I don't help her, an innocent person dies. And so does a friend, he thought to himself, but Rose didn't need to know that aspect about Titania.
Rose calmly sat down on the bed next to Grognar and patted his hand.
You'll do the right thing, she assured him.
I don't know that, Rose. He wrapped an arm around his sister and squeezed her against him. I hate this.
Yeah, I know.
But she didn't know. Grognar hated far more than these circumstances. But that kind of talk wasn't productive. He quietly stroked his sister's hair and looked at her up and down. You look sleepy. You should go back to bed, sis.
Will you? She asked.
No, probably not,
Grognar admitted. Rose smiled and leaned against him, beaming a mischievous smirk back at him.
Then neither will I.
She crossed her arms defiantly, as if daring him to object.
Mom won't like you being up so late.
How come she doesn't mind you being up late then?
I'm older than you, Grognar pointed out, pulling out his pipe again, like it was some kind of mark of adulthood. Rose pouted and shook her head.
Because of that stupid cataclysm, she insisted.
In truth, he'd always been her older brother, but the age gap hadn't always been this large. Before the cataclysm, Rose had been 10 years old, while Grognar had been 17. She had regressed a few years, while he had progressed, leaving her about 13 years old, while he was a reasonable 45, give or take. But Rose just wanted to argue. Somehow, this was helpful to her. Grognar enjoyed her company. Rose then glanced up at him, her smile gone.
So, are you going to help Titania?
Grognar ran a finger through her hair before sighing and looking out the window, as there was a very dim light igniting the sky. In a few hours, it would be morning, and Titania would die.
Not a lot of time to decide, he answered.
When dawn came, Titania heard the sound of keys in a latch jangling like a death bell. She glanced up to see two inquisitorial guards march in to undo the chains that held her to the room. They lifted off the stocks, and she was locked in, but not once did she resist. The guards themselves looked a bit confused by her lack of resistance. No doubt they'd been warned what a dangerous and wild creature she was, so they had expected a great deal of violence. Titania would have laughed had she had the joy to do so. Rather, she had nothing left, and she knew it. The two of them took 2 shackles and strapped them to her wrists so that her arms were kept behind her back. She was taller than both of them, and any time she shifted, they flew to their spears, aiming at them in her back. "One false move, demon!" Titania glanced back at them with an expression she would have wanted to be rage, but it looked more like a desperate dog trying to understand why it was being disciplined. She marched out of the cell, and Titania became increasingly aware of a gentle hum, a strange vibration all around the building. She tried to push it out of thought, but the more they walked, the louder and stronger it seemed to get. She slowed a moment, trying to pick up the noise. "What is that?" she finally asked. "You'll find out. Now walk," the guard barked. Titania sighed and walked on as the sound got louder and louder. Finally, as she was walked out of the main doors, onto the entry steps of the building, she saw the source. A crowd had gathered outside the building to see Titania. By a rough guess, Titania surmised that half of Orkshire must be there. It had to be around 800 or 900 people of all shapes and sizes. Even a few orcs had snuck into the crowd. This struck Titania as odd, considering the Inquisition wanted them just as dead as her, but then again, maybe they wanted the orcs to see Titania die, so they knew what to look forward to if they stuck around. Titania scoffed at this notion. Their deaths wouldn't be nearly so open in public. In a twisted way, maybe this was the Inquisition's idea of rewarding her for her help in dealing with Josiah's death. A public and thought-out execution rather than being gored like a pig in an alley. The crowd all gasped and pointed, some cheering as Titania walked out and others jeering, shouting for them to let her go. In the center of the makeshift platform was a large wooden block which was about 3 feet by 4 feet wide. The guard walked her to face it and then kicked her calf. She let out a yelp and dropped to her knees before the block, and its purpose became sickeningly clear. She started to lower her upper body over the block so her neck would rest in its center, but was stopped as one of the guards grabbed her hair and yanked it back, forcing her to remain in an upright position. "Not yet, demon," he instructed. Titania glanced at her right to see High Priest Vivian walking onto the platform, and right behind her was the little traitor Michael, wearing different armor now. He was in steel material that coated his arms and legs and upper chest. He had a sword strapped to his side and several strange bags and satchels on his sides. He had a blank stare like he didn't care how this ordeal went, one way or another. As Vivian approached, Titania turned her gaze away to look at the crowd, who were becoming very silent to listen to her. "Citizens of Orkshire," she announced, "in the last 10 years of this world's history, we have seen the fall of the old world and the rise of this one. With the rise of the new, humanity has been plagued by the surging of demons, monsters, mutants, and abominations, outcasts from the sight of God. These vile spawn are a blight upon our world and must be dealt with swiftly and without recourse." "Jessai was the real monster," a voice shouted. "Titania's a hero! Let her go! Justice! Kill the demon!" Voices shouted and mixed with each other. Praises for Titania and curses came in equal quantity. Titania's eyes skimmed the crowd, and Vivian continued talking as the shouting died to a reasonable level. It was remarkable just how loud Vivian could be when she wanted to be. "The Inquisition has arrived in your province with the hope of restoring peace and order after the chaos and evil that was Josiah the Devourer. While the ogress Titania might have had a hand in his eventual defeat, her power exceeds what the Inquisition considers permissible. As such, we offer her a swift and honorable death." "Honorable," Titania whispered, biting back the irony on her tongue. "Then give me a sword and let me fight for my life." Vivian ignored her and looked to Michael. "By order of the archangels of the Inquisition, Titania the demon is sentenced to death." There was a loud ripple of roars from the crowd at this, some in glee and others in horror. Vivian had turned to Michael. "Is he coming?" "He told me he could be here promptly. We're technically 5 minutes early." "Give him that 5 minutes, and then we'll begin without him if need be," Michael answered. While the two waited, Titania's eyes froze on a specific part of the crowd where a man and woman stood. The man had tanned skin from years of working in the sun and gray hair balding at the top. The woman next to him had longer but beautifully silver hair with a mature face. The man wore an old and filthy shirt covered in dirt and grime from work outside and the construction of buildings and reinforced walls. The woman looked tired but still lovely. The cataclysm had given back a few years of her life to give her a youthful look, but there was no mistaking her or the man. "Mom, Dad," Titania whispered. The two had their eyes glued on Titania, and they stared. Did they recognize her? It'd been 7 years since she'd faked her death. Would they recognize the ogress that had once been their son? She had half a mind to shout to them, to call out their names, but then bit her lip and shook her head as tears built up in her eyes. Damn it. She didn't want to die now, not in front of her family, not like this. About time, Michael snapped. Titania turned her eyes to the side of the platform where another figure was walking up. He was fully dressed in his archangel armor, with his skull mask on again. His eyes glared down at Titania, not even acknowledging Vivienne or Michael. He had both his sword and short blade at his side, and held in his hand a long axe, used likely for a specific purpose. Blemish? Titania asked. Blemish didn't answer her, but just stopped short of the execution block with an axe. Blemish, you're all right, Titania gasped. She hadn't seen him since she'd been taken, but then the reality sank in as to why he was here. He was with them now. He was back in the Inquisition's fold. He was here to kill her. So that's how it is. Let's get this over with, please, Vivienne asked over the shouts of the crowd. Blemish walked behind Titania and put a hand on her shoulder, pushing her down so that she was forced to lay her torso over the block. Her neck was exposed on the wood, and Blemish carefully picked up the axe. He was wordless, and there was a cold, calculated glare in his stare that Titania knew to be an archer's gaze. He was being careful to aim where he needed to. David! The scream rocked Titania right to her blood, her old name ringing over the sound of the crowd. Titania's eyes flashed to where her mother and father had been, and now both were fighting their way to the platform, having finally realized who she was. They were white as sheets and pushing and shouting to get to her. Seeing their mad dash for her, Vivienne snapped her fingers to the 3 inquisitorial guards who rushed to the crowd to restrain them. Let her go! Let David go! Give me back my baby! Titania couldn't stop tears now. She sobbed and lowered her head in shame. They knew she was alive, only to watch her die right in front of them. Mom? Dad, Titania cried, I am sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you. Restrain them, please, Vivienne asked calmly, as if it were something simple to request, like a refill at a restaurant. The guards grabbed both her mother and father and pulled them away as they thrashed furiously. Blemish glanced slowly from them to Titania again, as if piecing together who they were, but that didn't stop him from lifting the axe over his head. There was a blood-curdling shriek as the blade came swinging down, and blood sprayed like a fountain from the impact of the blade on flesh. For a moment, there was nothing but silence as the world paused in respect to the axe and its swing. There was a moment of disbelief, relief, or maybe just understanding. All stared as the head rolled from its body and landed on the platform with a gentle thud. And Blemish stood over it, his own tears rolling under his mask in agony and final vindication. The choice had finally been made. And that is chapter 20. Let's scroll up. There we go. Well, I'm glad that y'all are having fun in chat. I have no idea what y'all are talking about. Don't much care either. All right. All right, fix that. Sorry. All right, I guess some of y'all want me to continue. What do you think, Hannah? What do you think, Mal? Should I continue?
I'll let you guys decide. I want to hear Hannah's and Mal's thoughts real quick. If Mal is still there, of course. Yeah, I loved writing this story. This was so much fun. But just some people were not all that interested. The story didn't go very far. Like this chapter alone, the one we're about to read, chapter 21, only got 800 views. I think you should give the people what they want. All right. Let's read chapter 21. All right, here we go. Chapter 21. I wrote this on May 22nd. Here we go. There was a scream from the crowd as the head of one of the Inquisition guards behind Titania fell to the ground with a sickening thud, blood spilling from his stump of a neck like a faucet. The other guard made a move to attack, but Blemish was faster, swinging the pommel of the axe up and into his abdomen. The guard grunted and fell back just in time for Blemish to plant the axe head into the armored helmet and deep into the head through it. "Traitor!" a guard from the audience roared, gathering his fellows. He wouldn't have made it before Michael anyway, who was already drawing his own sword. Blemish then rounded on Michael, dropping the axe and pulling his own weapons, the sword and short blade. Vivian pulled back from the inevitable fight, and the guards knew better than to approach the two archangels about to duel. The crowd was in awe as cheers, shouts, and panicked cries filled the air, nearly drowning out what Michael was saying. "I had a feeling you'd turn on us, filthy heretic lover," he spat. "It makes sense. You were a failure as an archangel. The only proper path for you is the arms of the heathens." "You're wrong," Blemish answered sharply, his expression hidden by his mask, but his voice venomous. "You're wrong about me. I'm not choosing heathens or heretics. I'm choosing my family. My mother." Whatever response Michael had expected, this certainly was not it. For a brief moment, his guard faltered and his eyes widened, flashing a disdain unseen before. "You're what?" he spat in horror. "Titania is an ogress, but she's my mother. I won't let anyone hurt her. I won't lose my mother again." Only a handful overheard this declaration, and none could believe it after it was said. Vivian was near mortified to the point she couldn't finish giving instructions to calm the crowd. Michael looked like he could vomit as his face turned fiercely pale. Titania just stared up at Blemish from her kneeling position, stunned and blushing fiercely. "Damn it, did you actually have to say that?" she hissed in embarrassment. "Blasphemy! You heretic little shit!" Michael lunged at Blemish, who parried the blow with his sword and then swung his dagger back at Michael's neck, who narrowly evaded. "And you were also wrong about my abilities as an archangel," Blemish replied, with an unfamiliar sense of arrogance that Titania hadn't heard before. She'd begun to question if she'd started to wear off on him. She wanted to break her bonds and help him, but the chain was too tight on her wrists, and she was still struggling to sit up from her kneeling position. She watched on in desperate fear as Blemish and Michael danced a lethal ballet that could only be described as elegant but terrifying. Michael was clearly amazing, and she could attest that he was a good swordsman, considering she'd fought him previously when they were captured. He moved the sword like it was a part of his arm rather than a tool, and he was able to parry and evade near-death blows and react with timing that was hardly humanly possible. But Blemish was just as incredible. Titania knew he was good, but there was something different about him now. The way he moved was more direct and more cunning. He didn't slip and slide around his opponent or practice any patient or neutral positions, but played an aggressive and vicious battle. His swords were carefully wielded with the deathly precision of a long-practiced warrior. She felt a slight sense of pride in watching Blemish, but was not even aware of the figure coming behind her. "Titania!" Titania turned her head to look and gasped as she saw Mariel standing behind her, smiling. "Thank goodness you're all right. Mariel? It's not just me," she giggled. Titania suddenly became aware of another person behind her, working on the lock of her chains. "Philip is here too. Blemish sprung us before coming out here. He told us to wait until the panic started, and, well, it sure started." Finally, the chains fell from her wrists, and Titania jumped to her feet again, feeling her strength and confidence returning to her. "I need a weapon, quick!" "No time," Philip snapped. "Our job is to get lost, not get killed." "I'm not running away from this," Titania snapped. "Damn it, I will drag your oversized ass out of Orkshire if I have to," Philip growled. "The Inquisition has the town hostage now. It's out of our hands. Let's go already." Philip jumped into the crowd and took off through the scrambling and frightened people. Mariel ran after him, and Titania turned her attention to Blemish. "Blemish!" she cried. "Get going," he shouted. "I'll catch up." "You're all dying here. Every one of you heretics," Michael sneered. "I'll make it my mission to find all of you and execute you." He made another furious swipe at Blemish, who stepped through the blow, using his short sword to deflect the strike. Sparks flew from their swords as he plunged his long sword deeper into Michael's hip. Michael started to let out a curse, but was stopped by a sudden kick from Blemish into his shoulder, sending him sprawling back.
I can hold him, Titania, Blemish cried. Just leave him to me. Run! Titania stared at Michael, climbing back to his feet, fire in his eyes. Without a weapon, she couldn't hope to fight Michael with Blemish, so with a look of regret, she jumped off the platform and darted to the crowd. The audience jumped out of her way as she easily towered almost all of them. She had lost sight of Philip and Mariel, but was able to see her way through as she could look over the heads of the crowd. David! Titania stopped again as she nearly ran past her mom and dad, both now standing close to the platform she just escaped from. Titania stood stock still. The crowd shouted things at her like run, or die, or get away. But none of those things resonated with Titania as her eyes stared at her mom and dad's gaze of disbelief. It's really you. You're alive! Titania opened her mouth to answer, but no sound came out. Her body trembled like a leaf on the wind, and her teeth bit into her lip, fighting back the urge to scream. Every inch of her felt wrong. She felt vulnerable. Where do you begin when you've been discovered as lying to your family for so long? She wanted to apologize, but no words would suffice for the amount of pain she'd put them through. She wanted to explain, but what explanation would be adequate? As she stood there slack-jawed and fighting back an urge to cry, she took a step back from them, almost like she feared their touch. There she is! Titania's eyes turned at last to see the Inquisition guards bursting through the crowd towards her. Her father jumped forward to intercept them. No! Stop! He cried. Titania roared and rushed between him and the Inquisition. She swung her fist hard into the helmet of her foe, feeling the pin of metal meeting her fist, but also hearing the satisfying gong of the metal bending and watching him fall over in a heap. Two others rushed to fill his place, and she struck with all she had to fight them off. She couldn't let them see near her family. Not now. Not ever. The Inquisition would be no different than Josiah. Not at all. Which meant her response had to be the same as it had been with Josiah. I'm sorry, Titania whimpered back to her mother and father, glancing back with the most apologetic and pained expression she had ever made. Tears rolled down her face as the words passed her lips. I'm not your son anymore. With a bellow of anguish, she kneed the closest Inquisition soldier in the stomach before turning and running away. Sobs followed her footsteps as she sprinted away from the cries of her mother and the tears of her father. She couldn't ever be their son again. After breaking through the crowd, she managed to catch sight of Mariel and Philip running to a house on the far side of the street, where Aenor had the door held open for them. His eyes met hers, and he gave a quick and curt nod as if he wasn't too happy to see her, but was accepting of it. You got something in your eyes? He asked as Titania caught up and hurried inside. Titania cleaned the tears and redness from her eyes as best she could. The hell do you care? She asked. Aenor shook his head and sighed. I guess I don't. Can we save this conversation for later? Mariel shouted. She yanked open the secret door to the underground tunnel of the Citadel. Let's go. Now. What about Blemish? Titania asked. He said he had a way out, Philip explained. Our job was just to get you away. Titania scowled at this and blinked to keep the tears from building up again as she squeezed her way down to the cramped tunnel for her tall body. All right, let's head out, troops, Philip cried. We're not soldiers, Mariel chastised. Damn it, this is a rescue operation, and I've always dreamed of being a cool superhero when I was a kid, so let me have this, Philip snapped. How about all of you just shut up for a while, Aenor asked politely, though there was an edge in his voice that showed it would be unwise to argue. Michael and Blemish circled each other and began exchanging blows quickly and without mercy. Both had a few scratches and scars now, but Michael's stomach stab would be bleeding badly, and his body was becoming sluggish. Blemish just had to attack at the right moment, and he could win. But he merely stayed out of reach. You turned your back on the church, the Inquisition, God, and all that you ever were, Michael snapped. Do you feel any remorse? My feelings are my own. My life is my own, Blemish answered. I do not abandon God, only the Inquisition. We are the right hand of God. We are his sword against the demons of this world, Michael roared. Blemish didn't answer as his eyes looked past Michael at Vivienne, who was rallying her soldiers to surround him. The guards were beginning to close in, and he knew that time was almost up. He took a few tentative steps back, fearing that he was now becoming outnumbered, and his fight with Michael had him worn out. Surrender, Blemish, Vivienne announced. Just come quietly, and we won't have to carry this on any further. The people of Orkshire must know that we are here for them. If we fight amongst ourselves, it weakens our resolve. Rest easy, High Priestess. I have nothing to do with the Inquisition anymore. You're not fighting amongst yourselves at all, Blemish assured her. However, despite his words, he knew there was no easy way out of this. He had hoped to have killed Michael by now, but Michael proved far more difficult to fight than he'd thought. He began to lower his swords. I'm sorry, Mom, Blemish whispered. Guess I won't be meeting you later. Michael made a move towards Blemish, his sword raised to strike him down. I'm going to bleed you dry like a pit. Ah! Michael screamed and hit the ground, clutching his shoulder as pulsing blood came out of the side of his arm. Everyone had hit the ground at the sound of the gunshot. Every soldier on the stage ducked to the ground in terror, and Blemish looked around wildly for the source of the gunfire. The crowd all hit the ground or scattered at the sound as the panic took them all away from any semblance of reason. Blemish saw a familiar bearded face in the crowd, holding a pistol. Just as suddenly as he'd been seen, the dwarf slipped back into the panicked and terrified crowd. Just another bystander. Blemish burst from his place and ran into the crowd to eager and vanished into their number and get away to freedom and to a new life, leaving behind a wounded, furious, and very humiliated Inquisition. And that is chapter 21. Well, what did y'all think of that one? So we've got time to read one more story before we call it. And I will leave it up to you guys to decide. We can read the next chapter of New Epoch and read chapter 22, or I can start reading Monster Club. I will let you guys decide. All right, so we've got 3 votes for Monster Club, huh? So we need a break from New Epic. All right. Okay, let me go to Monster Club real quick. Haven't picked up this story in a while. Probably won't be my best. How long ago was it that I wrote this story? Let's see. Oh gosh, I wrote the first chapter of Monster Club in January 6, 2013. God, this story is just over 10 years old. Wow. All right. So, Monster Club. So, to give you guys a little bit of a background on Monster Club, I wrote this story, like I said, back in 2013. Originally, the idea was, I had a friend at the time named Mika, who I did story and art work with. We basically teamed up and formed a page together, where I would write stories and she would draw art, or she would draw art that I would write stories for. And she presented an idea. She wanted us to do, let's make a story about a family of vampires. And I didn't want to do that because I thought that was way too similar to stuff like Twilight, and I felt like that had been done to death. But I saw the Scooby-Doo TV special, the movie special, I think, called Scooby-Doo and the Ghoul School, which is where Shaggy, Scooby, and Scrappy have to become the new gym teachers at a boarding school for girls. But the catch is that all the girls are daughters of famous movie monsters, like Dracula, the Wolf Man, a mummy, Frankenstein's monster, all that kind of stuff. So I thought, wouldn't it be kind of cool if instead of a family of vampires, you had a family of monsters instead? And so I thought, let's do that. Let's have it where it's a family of monsters who come from different backgrounds and have different goals and wants and stuff like that. And so we started it, and we created a family of these monsters. And so what I'll do tonight is I'll read you the first and second chapter of Monster Club to kind of introduce you to it. Now, I will warn you, this story is old. I wrote it when I was still kind of young as a writer, so I definitely will say that this is not my number one best work. You will notice some flaws in it, but you will also see some of my areas where I was trying to improve. I have thought about going back and editing this and fixing it up to be stronger, but let's read it together and we'll see where we go.
All right, let's do it. Monster Club Chapter 1, written January 6, 2013. The sky cried powerful tears over Abraham's head. He pulled his coat over his head and continued to run down the dirt road, which was quickly turning to mud beneath his torn and blood-covered sneakers. He'd been running for what felt like weeks, but for what only could have been a few days. Nothing looked familiar to him, which is what he wanted. The trees towered over him like great leafy giants, glaring at him, challenging him. Lightning struck overhead, lighting the sky with its deadly and brilliant lights. The thunderclap was like a loud roar, daring him to continue this mad race. Nature itself seemed to conspire against him. It fought ahead. Go ahead, he growled to himself. It's not like life's done me any favors before. The truth was that Abraham Singer had been running for most of his life. He had no home to speak of, and he had no adults to call parents. To the common eye, Abraham Singer was just a simple 15-year-old orphan boy. However, it wasn't pity Abraham wanted, nor was it empathy. He simply wanted a home, a place to lay his head. He wanted consistency, and he wanted love, but he had never had any of these things, and none of the orphanages or foster homes he'd ever had. Had he ever felt any love or kindness that came with a real home? Still, just about anything would beat this damn storm. Abraham snarled as he continued to run. He hoped to come across... Hold on, ad, sorry. I'll let the ads skip. There we go, as I was saying. He had hoped to come across any form of shelter. It would not be the first time he had hidden himself inside an abandoned bear cave or a hollowed-out tree. He just hoped that he would find one before he caught his death of cold. His jacket was soaked over and offered no protection from the bitter chill of the falling water that poured down upon his head. He looked far off to the left to see a large lake beyond the trees. He was close to a body of water. His heart skipped a beat as he took note of this. In a storm like this, the water levels were sure to rise, which meant that he would have to stay upon high ground. Quickly, he turned and started running off the path towards a more distant area. He knew that it wasn't safe to get too far away from the path, but he had no way of knowing just how high the water might get at the end of the thunderstorm. The fallen leaves on the ground proved to be more slippery and hazardous than the muddy earth had been sprinting down only moments earlier. He constantly lost his balance and was forced to slow down his pace if he wished to remain standing on his own 2 feet. A clap of thunder shattered Abraham's eardrums as he came crashing to his knees with a scream. The roar of the wind overtook him and knocked him backwards down the hill back towards the path he had left. He rolled like a log down a ledge until he finally came to a rest upon a tree. He looked up and tried to climb to his feet. And then he saw it. What? Up on the other side of the path was a large house. It looked like a log cabin of some kind that stood 2 stories high and looked big enough to hold at least 3 families in it. What was a house doing in the middle of the woods like this? And why was it so close to the lake that it might get flooded? At the moment, these questions didn't matter to the cold and wet Abraham. He jumped to his tired feet and stumbled across the path to the house. He tripped and slammed against the door. He lay his hands upon the wood and panted heavily, longing for the warmth inside. "Hello?" Abraham cried over the wind and rain. He slammed his fist against the door, but there was no answer. "Please, let me in," Abraham shouted again. "I'm sorry, but I have no one else to go for now." Still, no one answered his pleas. Clearly, everyone inside must be asleep. However, there was nothing more that he could do than keep trying. "Help me, please! Open the door!" At long last, the door swung open, and Abraham felt himself slip into the room effortlessly. He ran in and turned and saw an old man standing by the door. He had a frail and wrinkled body with white hair. His body looked very pale, and it looked almost sunken in and sick. The man had an old suit, as if he had never changed into his sleeping clothes. He closed the door and turned to face Abraham. "Are you all right, boy?" he asked. Abraham wrapped his arms around himself to try and warm up his body. "Sir," he cried through chattering teeth, I'm very sorry. I didn't mean to intrude." The man shook his head and waved the apology aside. "Oh, no need to be sorry, lad." He turned and glanced out the window. "That's quite a serious storm going on out there." He then walked past the boy and walked deeper into the house. "So what is a young man like yourself doing so far away from the city?" Abraham followed the man to the house. For a log cabin, the house was very lovely on the inside. It looked well taken care of, and the place looked like it was a home for more than just him. However, it was too dark for him to fully appreciate the place. Abraham didn't want to tell the truth. He didn't know what the man might do if he knew the young man who he just accepted into his house was a runaway orphan. I'm just, pardon my rudeness," the man suddenly chuckled. "Sometimes I forget myself. I've yet to introduce myself, have I?" He turned and held out his hand. "You may call me Solomon." "Everyone does." Abraham reached out and took Solomon's hand and felt a shiver go down his spine.
Solomon's hand was freezing cold, as if it hadn't felt warmth in hours. However, the house felt rather warm, so why was he so cold? Maybe Solomon really was sick. "I'm Abraham Singer," Abraham replied. Solomon grinned mysteriously. "Abraham?" he asked in surprise. "That's a very strong name." Solomon continued to walk through the house until he came into a large room that appeared to be the living room. There were 2 couches and an armchair that all faced a coffee table placed in the front of a fireplace. A large window on the far wall showed the back porch of the house where the rain was still falling furiously. The lake was very visible now, and fortunately it seemed far enough away that it wouldn't reach the house any time soon. Sir?" "Please, boy, call me Solomon. No one has called me sir in a very long time," Solomon interrupted. "Okay, sorry. Solomon, what is this place?" Solomon stopped and looked at Abraham suspiciously. "Well, why, it's my home, boy. It's been my home since my childhood." He then looked up at the ceiling as if thinking far back into the past. "My God, it feels like an eternity ago." "Does anyone else live here?" Abraham asked. Solomon nodded. "Oh, yes. It's home to 5 other young people like yourself." "Your children?" Abraham asked. Solomon let out a laugh that sounded both humorous and yet somehow hollow. No, dear boy, not my children. They, like you, came here seeking shelter from a storm, but a storm of a very different sort." He turned back to face Abraham. "If you stay the night, you might meet them." Abraham suddenly looked up at the stairs in front of him, leading into a very dark and creepy part of the house. It seemed to lead to the 2nd floor, and the dark corridor looked far too frightening. "Actually, maybe it's best that I move on," Abraham muttered. Solomon shook his head again and smiled. "Oh dear, no. That storm is far too wretched for one as young as you to hope to last. I insist that you stay the night." Abraham glanced out at the large window to see a tree bending against the weight of the wind, and he knew he had no other alternative. Okay, I'll stay." Solomon clapped his hands together happily. "Wonderful." He stepped towards the rails and indicated the corridor at the top. "Now, most of the others are asleep right now. I doubt even Asher would want to be out and about in this weather, so you will need to be as quiet as possible. Make your way down to the far end of the hall. You can sleep in my room tonight." Abraham suddenly paused. No, I couldn't do that," Abraham whispered. I don't want to take your room." Solomon smiled kindly. "No need to worry, son. I haven't slept in that room for years." Abraham stared at him curiously. "Why haven't you—" "It's getting late, isn't it?" Solomon asked quickly. "I suggest heading on up. Remember, go to the far end of the hallway on your right. I'll have Michelle wake you in the morning." "Michelle? Don't worry. You'll meet her soon enough as well. Now, off to bed with you. Just call if you need anything." Abraham made his way carefully upstairs, but the coldness of the 2nd floor was quite unnerving. It got steadily darker, and without the guidance of Solomon, he felt almost lost. He silently moved to the corridor and looked around. "Which way was it?" he asked. The hallway was full of doors, and at the far end of each side there were doors. One was the old man Solomon's, and the other probably belonged to someone else's living here. I think he said left." Abraham turned to his left and walked down toward the far door. He reached it and touched the handle, pushing it open with a creak. The inside was dark and dank. It almost felt moist. Was the roof leaking in here? He took a step in and felt a carpet beneath his feet. His heart was pounding like a drum. He raised his other foot and smash! "Ow!" Abraham cried. His foot hadn't budged an inch. It was stuck to the floor. He'd stumbled and landed on his face. As he did, he tried to raise himself up, but found that his upper body was now stuck like his feet were. He looked down at the carpet, only to find that it wasn't what he was expecting. It wasn't carpet covering the floor. It was spider webs? Abraham gasped. Indeed, the entire floor was covered with webbing. As he looked around the walls, he saw that cobwebs hung from the ceilings, the windows, the walls, and even the bed was laced in one giant and very complex string of webbing. He struggled against the bonds of the web, but his resistance was futile. What the hell? Let me go! The more he fought, the more trapped he became, like a fly stuck in a web. Abraham's body was becoming covered in the silky prison. Soon he couldn't even move. He could barely squirm anymore. He started to call out, to plead for Solomon to come and help him, when suddenly he heard someone stirring. "Is someone there?" Joy came to Abraham's pounding heart. It was the voice of a young girl. She sounded only about his age, maybe 20 at the oldest. She must have heard Abraham struggling and come to get him. He heard the clicking of what he could only guess being high-heeled shoes. "Who is it?" Suddenly the movement stopped and Abraham could feel the presence of someone in the room. "Help!" Abraham cried desperately. There was a gasp and Abraham looked up through the inky darkness to see a girl appear above him. She had long silver hair that fell down to her back. It was too dark to make out her face, but he could tell that she was very thin and very young.
"Oh my goodness, who are you?" she cried.
"It's a long story," Abraham chuckled. Could you please get me out of this?" The girl nodded.
"Oh, certainly, certainly."
She knelt down and began pulling the webbing off of him, muttering to herself,
"I wish Solomon had told us we were having company. I would have tidied up my room a bit."
"This is your room?" Abraham asked in shock. "How can you live like this?" He leaped to his feet, now free of the webs, and turned to find a light switch.
"Oh, I know. It must look awful right now. I've just grown so slack with my decorating. You should have seen this room when I first moved in. Webs covered every inch of the floor."
"But why would you want webs to—" Abraham flipped the light switch and got his answer. The room was bathed in spider webs. The webs were enormous, as if an army of spiders had built them. Webs hung from the ceilings, the cabinets, the closets. The window was coated with them, and the floor was covered so thick with webs that it looked like a silk carpet. There was no bed in the room at all, but just a giant portion of webbing that looked like a pad or hollow of sorts. And then he looked at the girl herself and felt his heart stop. From head to waist, she looked like a normal girl. Her hair was long and silvery, and her body was a nice peach color. Her arms were nice and dainty, and she had her hair pulled back in a braid. It was the rest of her that caused him concern. Her eyes were a deep ruby red, and they had no pupils, and her mouth was smiling, a pair of sharp teeth behind her lips. However, what terrified him most of all was that from the waist down was a giant black spider abdomen, complete with 8 long, spiny legs. Her abdomen was as long as her body and twice as thick. She was terrifying. How could such a lovely young girl's upper torso be glued to such a monstrous lower half? It was horrifying. He stared at her bug-eyed, unsure whether to faint or run for his very life.
"Oh my God, you're soaked to the bone," the spider girl cried. "Don't tell me you were out in that rainstorm."
Abraham couldn't believe what he was looking at. This girl seemed totally unaware of what she was.
"Oh, you poor thing,"
She scurried over, her long legs moving fast and gracefully towards him. She started to embrace him in a hug, but Abraham leapt back fast. "Stay back!" Abraham cried. The creature looked surprised, and then she laughed.
"Oh, of course." She giggled and stepped back apologetically. "You don't even know me. I wouldn't want to be hugged by a complete stranger either." She smiled and held out her hand to the terrified boy. "My name's Sarah. It's nice to meet you."
Abraham backed away from Sarah's hand as if it was a poisonous spider, which it very may well have been. I gotta go!" Abraham spun around and darted out of the door, only to run headlong into Solomon. Whoa! Abraham tried to catch himself before he hit Solomon, but he couldn't stop himself in time. He closed his eyes tightly, prepared for the impact that never came. He sat in horror. Abraham flew through the air and landed on his face against the hardwood floor, looking up in horror and amazement as he spun around to face Solomon. He was looking down at him, unmoving and rather sad. Behind him was the wide-eyed and worried Sarah. "I told you that my room was to the right, boy," Solomon said sadly. "Now you've gone and seen a lot more than I expected you to see tonight." "What the hell's going on here?" Abraham screamed. "I should have run headlong into you, old man, but I passed right through you, and that girl, that thing, is half spider and half a Drida," Solomon corrected him quietly. "What?" Abraham bellowed. "She's a Drida, not a thing." "Whatever you call it, it still isn't normal. What the hell is this place?" Abraham roared. Solomon sighed and stood up straight, and suddenly, due to the light filtering in from Sarah's room, Abraham could see that Solomon wasn't a solid body, but a specter. Abraham could see right through his body. I'm Solomon, or rather the ghost of Solomon to be precise. I've been dead for over 40 years, and I've guarded and tended to this house ever since." He stepped forward and stood over Abraham with a terrifying authority. "So this place is full of—" "This is a home for monsters who have no home for their own," Solomon stated forcefully. He spoke as if he was a businessman explaining the terms of an agreement or contract. He leaned close to Abraham's terrified and pale face, his pale eyes boring into him. "Welcome to the Monster Club, human." And that was Chapter 1. I hope you guys like that. Now, technically it is 10:41. Normally I end these streams at 10:30, but I don't have work tomorrow, and because y'all have been pretty good tonight, I will read Chapter 2 if y'all want me to. Let me know while I take a drink. And Lorik, how you doing, bro? How'd your D&D session go? Excellent. Just wanted to check in.
Just wanted to check in, see how you're doing.
You still going?
Yeah. I'm giving them the option to read chapter 2 before we go.
Oh, okay.
I figured, I don't have work tomorrow, so
Yeah, all right.
might as well.
Do what you want.
All right, one more chapter? All right, one more chapter. Here we go. Chapter 2. I wrote this January 8th of 2013. Can you believe it? Can you believe it? Anyway. Here we go. Monster Club, Abraham cried in stunned amazement. You mean like a school club or something? Solomon laughed. Don't be daft, boy. It's just a name. Solomon walked towards the stairs and made his way down. Abraham followed close behind him as they walked through the still, dark house. The rain outside was still pouring heavily, but the lightning and thunder seemed to have died down considerably. What we really are is a safe haven. We provide a home for monsters who have none. Currently, we have 5 monsters that reside here, and you will get to meet each and every one of them. Abraham felt his heart skip a beat. Would he really have to face all these monsters? What would they be like? Would either of you like some tea? Abraham turned to see Sarah scuttling behind them. She was tying a white apron behind her back and tying her hair back with a red ribbon. If she didn't have those spider legs and abdomen, she'd be a very beautiful young woman. Sarah, you know that I haven't had anything to eat or drink in 40 years. Sarah grinned and winked to the far corner. Actually, Solomon, I wasn't talking to you. Abraham and Solomon both turned to see another girl standing in the corner. She was about as tall as Abraham, but she looked slightly older. She had a reddish-brown hair that fell down to her shoulders, and she had eyes like nothing Abraham had ever seen. They were misty and faded blue, like a husky dog. There was a hidden wildness behind her. It was etched across her face. Her body was lean, and it looked very tired. Her muscles were well-defined, and she looked almost cute in her pajamas. It was an interesting combination of beauty and wildness. Ah, Michelle, I didn't hear you come in, Solomon said with a grin. Michelle didn't return the smile, but kept her blue eyes trained on Abraham. I thought that you'd be asleep. I smelled a human in the house, so I came down to investigate, Michelle growled. Solomon sighed and turned to Abraham. Michelle is a werewolf, he explained. She has a heightened sense of smell, hearing, and sight, even while in her human form. Don't just go around sharing our secrets now, old man, Michelle barked fiercely. Solomon ignored her outburst and continued to face Abraham. You'll have to excuse her attitude. It's only 2 days before the next full moon, and she is going through a bit of a stress right now. Michelle made a move towards Solomon, but then stopped herself and snarled dangerously. Abraham knew it wasn't polite to stare, especially at a monster, but he couldn't help but gawk in awe as he heard the news that Michelle was a real werewolf. You're really a werewolf? Abraham cried. Michelle shot him a venomous look. And what if I am human? She snapped. Gonna find yourself some silver to put through my heart? Abraham suddenly went very quiet and shook his head. No, of course not. Michelle, be nice, Sarah called out. She was moving around behind the counter, pulling some cups and tea leaves. He's a guest in our house, after all. He shouldn't be here at all, Michelle roared, causing Abraham to jump backwards in surprise. Solomon just closed his eyes and groaned. It's because of humans that we made this club in the first place. Now we just let them walk in anytime they want to. It was the storm, dear, Solomon said calmly. He needed shelter, and I gave it to him, just like I have done for each and every one of you here. As he spoke, an odd quiet fell over the room. Sarah stopped moving, and her smile fell to the frown as she stared at the tea in front of her. Michelle just stared at her feet, unwilling to look up. The room spun around at the sound of this groaning, and Abraham let out a cry of fright. Descending down the stairs was what could only be surmised as a walking and moving mummy. Wrapped from head to toe in bandages and wrappings, it moved stiffly, but all the same, it was moving rather quickly. It walked with such a natural pace it looked nothing like they said it would in the movies. In fact, he looked rather small for what Abraham thought a mummy should look like. Tamil, Sarah cried happily. You're up awful early today. Tamil turned to face Abraham, making Abraham want to back away from him at a much quicker pace. Michelle only snorted. He's terrified, Michelle pointed out. Tamil took a step closer to Abraham and held out its long and bandaged hand. Abraham jumped back from it in horror. Tamil stopped and looked in Sarah's direction. Sarah giggled. You silly. It's only polite to look someone in the face when you shake their hand, Tamil. Suddenly, Tamil reached up and began to remove the bandages around his head. As he did, Abraham wasn't sure whether he wanted to look away or watch and see what emerged. He expected perhaps a skeleton or maybe a worn and withered corpse. He got neither.
The wrapping had been mostly removed with the exception of one solitary bandage looping over his face at a diagonal angle, going from the top left side of his head down over his nose and looping around the right bottom half of his head, just under his cheek. His hair was wild, dirty, and black. His skin was dark tan, and there were parts that looked a little worn or weak. His eyes were a deep, dark color that Abraham couldn't place. It looked almost black, but maybe dark brown. Tamil smiled a small and innocent smile. He reached out his hand once again. Ahela, Tamil said in a very tired and froggy accent. Abraham stared at the hand and didn't quite know what to do with it. He doesn't speak Egyptian, Tamil, Sarah joked. Tamil suddenly smiled sheepishly. Sorry, I'm not used to your language yet. Abraham carefully took Tamil's hand and shook it, letting go quickly. Tamil didn't seem offended by his fear. My name Tamil. Abraham answered nervous. Sorry, I'm mixing up my voice here. Abraham answered nervously. Tamil grinned. Tamil here is a mummy, Solomon said to Abraham. He was one of the most recent to ever come to the house. The first being Michelle herself, of course. Michelle grunted and sat down at the table. Sarah came out from behind the counter and handed a cup of tea to both Michelle and Abraham. Abraham took it politely, but was too nervous to take a drink. He was standing in a room with a spider woman, a ghost, a werewolf, and now a mummy. What kind of nightmare was this? Tamil, you haven't seen Asher or Calypso, have you? Sarah asked excitedly. I want them to meet our new guest. No need to worry, Sarah. We're here. Abraham spun back to the stairs where two figures had walked down and had entered the kitchen. One was a young girl with long silvery blue hair and blue-tinted skin. Her body was covered in strange and cryptic markings. Her feet were bare and her clothes were very light. She had on a white tank top and a black skirt. She had a silver eye that looked almost mystifying. He felt lost in it, like they were designed to pull people in. She looked exotic in a gorgeous way. But next to her was a tall and dark boy. He had black hair that was combed back with small bangs hanging slightly over his eyes. He had a broad shoulder and a very well-built body. He wore a leather jacket and had on a dark shirt underneath it, with an emblem of a cross on it. He wore jeans and boots that looked a little dirty. His eyes were what terrified him the most, though. They were dark and blood red and so very human and yet inhuman. There was a depth to them, a hunger. This was a person that Abraham knew was extremely powerful. Sarah squealed at the sight of them and scuttled out to place her hands on Abraham's shoulders. Come and meet our new housemate. This is Abraham. The red-eyed young man looked at Abraham and then his eyes narrowed. You're a human, he said surprisingly. As he spoke these words, Tamil and the girl next to him both stopped and stared at Abraham with the same awestruck expression that he should have been giving all of them. Tamil clearly didn't realize that Abraham had been human. The girl next to the red-eyed boy looked surprised and stepped away quickly, placing herself up against the boy. His red eyes had narrowed and were glaring at him. What are you doing here, human? He's our guest, Asher. Michelle took a step forward. Asher looked up at Michelle and frowned. A guest? The girl asked. Michelle nodded. Yes, Calypso, she answered. And I don't like it much myself. I still have plenty of questions that I want answered. But, for the time being, this human is a guest in our house. Michelle turned to Abraham and pointed to the table. Take a seat. Abraham hesitated, but to look in Michelle's blue eyes told him that resisting was not a wise move. He quickly moved to the table and sat down on one of the chairs, trying hard not to look as scared as he felt. Michelle motioned for the other monsters to gather around her, which they all did, obediently. Soon all eyes were on Abraham. Abraham, meet the Monster Club, Michelle said. She walked to one monster and, as she spoke, moved to each one individually to say their name. Tamil, Sarah, Calypso, Asher, Solomon, and myself. She walked forward and stood in front of Abraham dangerously. This is a club has one purpose, to protect and shelter monsters who have nowhere else to go or live. Because humans, who have hunted us and drove us away, forced us to. Abraham suddenly understood why it was that him being human was such a big deal, and why everyone seemed so threatening towards him. I honestly didn't know, Abraham said. Well, we'd like to believe you, but we can't take any chances. Michelle knelt down so that she was eye level with Abraham. I need to know why you're here, where you're from, and what your intentions are. Abraham stopped and stared at her, and then all the monsters around her, who stared at him curiously and expectantly, waited for his answer. That's private, Abraham muttered darkly, not willing to give away his origins. Michelle's strong finger suddenly gripped his chin and yanked his head to look at her. You have intruded upon our house and invaded our privacy, and you expect me to give a damn about yours? She let go of Abraham's head, and he let it hang, as she had just made a very strong and compelling point. You will tell us those 3 things, or Asher will take them from you by force. Asher took a threatening step forward, and his eyes flashed again with that hungry red glow. Abraham gulped and tried to look away and not think about those eyes. I'm here because I'm on the run right now, Abraham answered solemnly. From who exactly? Michelle pressed. Everyone. No one. I don't know anymore, Abraham admitted. I've been from one foster home to foster home, moving from orphanage to orphanage. I guess I'm on the run from those places. Michelle gave him a curious look. Foster homes? Orphanages? What were you doing there? My mom and dad died in a car crash 6 years ago, Abraham replied darkly. Michelle responded as if she'd been slapped in the face. She backed away slightly and looked at the ground solemnly, ashamed of her questioning. The entire room seemed to darken as everyone in the house suddenly seemed downcast, as if they understood the same kind of situation Abraham was in. I apologize. I didn't mean to open old wounds, Michelle muttered. Abraham shrugged off the apology. It's okay. I hardly remember what they look like anyway. It's been a long time. The face of a mother and father. Not something that ever should be forgotten, Tamil replied sadly. Abraham cocked his eyes to see Tamil's face better. The other monsters looked saddened, but Tamil looked positively depressed. Why? So, what do you plan to do now, Abraham? Solomon spoke up. He'd been standing silently to the side, watching the scene unfold before him. The entire room now glanced at Abraham, waiting for his answer. Abraham looked down and considered the question, carefully. He had not thought about his next move. To be honest, he never considered it in the past either. Abraham had always been a responsive person, not a planner. Abraham didn't act out until forced to, and he often did things on the spur of the moment. He didn't know where he was going to go when he ran away. He didn't know what he would do with himself. The thought had just not come to him. If it had, then he'd not paid any attention to it. I'm not sure, Abraham admitted. I guess I'll stay here overnight and then leave tomorrow when the rain stops. I'll go to the nearest city and find a place to stay there. No! All eyes spun to look at Sarah. Sarah was standing fiercely, staring at all the others through her red eyes. She had a determined look on her face. No one deserves to live on the run their whole life. Everyone needs a home. She marched forward on her 8 long legs and placed her hand on Abraham's hair protectively. He can live here with us. The statement drove a different response from the group that Abraham had anticipated. Solomon simply smirked at Sarah as she spoke these words. Michelle's mouth dropped in stunned amazement, as if she'd just heard something appalling. Tamil jumped back in shock. Asher gave a surprised stare at Sarah and then to Abraham. His eyes seemed to be trying to process the concept of keeping Abraham in the house. Calypso let out a small squeak of shock and covered her mouth with both hands. Sarah, do you realize what you're saying? Michelle hissed. Yes, I do, Sarah defended. And why shouldn't we take him in? He's like us. We needed a home, and Solomon gave us one. This is different, Michelle shouted. He is different. I don't know, Calypso spoke up softly. Her voice was so small and soft that Abraham had almost missed it. It might be nice having someone else around. Michelle turned and waved a finger at Calypso. Don't encourage her! I'm sorry, Calypso said quickly, backing away. Michelle turned back to Sarah. Think long and hard about what keeping a human around here would mean, Michelle barked. I think you should stay, Tamil said quickly. All eyes turned to Tamil as he fiddled with the bandages on his arms. If he stays, then would be another boy in the house, Tamil said with a laugh. Sarah and Solomon both cackled with laughter. Michelle just groaned under her breath. That's beside the point, and you know it, Michelle groaned. Asher, Solomon spoke up. The house went quiet as they turned to stare at Asher, who was standing silently by the corner. You've been awful quiet, my young fellow. Would you like to contribute? Asher glanced from Michelle to Abraham. He stared at Abraham long and hard, as if his red eyes were trying to see into Abraham's soul. I think you should stay. The house seemed stunned by his answer. Michelle turned and tapped her foot. You, more than anyone, know how risky such an act would be. Why do you think you should stay? Asher sighed and looked around the room, knowing that he had no choice but to explain himself. For one thing, everyone else seems to want him to stay, Asher pointed out. Second of all, we created this club as a safe haven for monsters who have no homes or have been cast away by humans. If we turn away anyone simply because they're different from us, then that makes us no better than the ones who wronged us. The group all smiled at Asher's answer. And Abraham was shocked at the way that Asher had answered. He thought for sure that Asher must hate him, but in the end, he'd saved him. Michelle frowned and then closed her eyes, letting all the arguments she'd heard sink in. Well, seems the decision's been made for me, Michelle said. Sarah squealed with delight and hugged Abraham's neck, making him squirm a little. Abraham noticed the rest of the house was snickering at him. Do you hear that, Abraham? She cried. You get to stay. This is your new home. Abraham didn't know what to say. A new home? A home was all he really wanted. A home where people cared about him, where people loved him. And here was a house full of some of the most terrifying and strange monsters and creatures he'd ever seen or heard of. This wasn't the kind of place he would call home. But then he thought about all he had seen, how the housemates had all stepped forward on his behalf, how they'd all defended him. They seemed to care, and they did want him to stay. What was it he wanted? Was it a home of normalcy or a home of caring? I guess I could use a bit of something new, Abraham whispered to himself with a shrug. And that is chapter 2, and where we'll probably need to end it because it is almost 11. I hope you guys have been enjoying this. What did you guys think of Monster Club? Let me know. And as a little gift, I may show you something cool. Let me see if I can't do this real quick. I may show you something neat if I can find it. Reading too long makes my voice hurt a little bit, so bear with me. I know it's here somewhere. First of all, okay. Let's try that again. Something was acting up on my end. No, okay. I thought that would work, but it did not work. That is a shame. That is a real shame. I was going to show you a picture, but it did not work. Let me try it this way. Maybe this way will work a bit better. Nope. Oh well. All right. Well, we'll try that again later. Was the one with red eyes a vampire? Yes, Asher's a vampire. So you have Michelle, who's a werewolf. You have Calypso, who's a mermaid. You have Tamil, who's a mummy. You have Sarah, who's a drider, and you have Asher, who is a vampire. So those are the characters you've met so far, and there are others who will show up. So that is where we're going to call it tonight. I want to thank all of you for joining me tonight. Oh, hold on, wait. Get rid of that. There we go. Okay. So let me go ahead and let you guys in on what's going on. So today at work, it was very busy. It was Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and that was exhausting. I'm still very sore, very tired, so I'm probably not going to stay up much longer. I'm probably going to start heading to bed soon. Tomorrow, I may be gaming with Havoc for a little bit, which would be cool. I'm also going to be working on my next video. Now, I have not heard what my new managing training schedule is going to be. We didn't have time to go over it today with my boss at work because of how busy we were. We're going to talk about it Wednesday. So Wednesday is the big day when I'll figure all that out, and I will let you guys know on Wednesday, probably during Lark's stream, what is going to happen. So this week will remain the same as it normally does, but after this week, things may change. All right, well, thank you guys so much. I hope you guys have a wonderful evening. And as always, I will see you in my next video. Take care.